Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Fantasy Fangirls Podcast, where two sisters dive deep into beloved fantasy lore, characters, themes, theories, and more.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode, where we're covering chapters 6 through 12 of A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. But as always, before we begin this deep dive, please listen closely to our content warning. While we're focusing our discussion on chapters 6 through 12 and book 2, we are going to be bringing in themes, foreshadowing lore, and other insights across the ACOTAR series. So yes, that does mean these episodes are spoiler central for all of the ACOTAR books. These ACOMAF deep dives do not, however, include spoilers for the rest of Sarah J. Maas's series, except at the end of some episodes, including this one, where we include our Maasverse Madness segment. We'll give a big old spoiler warning beforehand, so if you haven't read the rest of the Maasverse, you can leave the episode right there, no worries at all, or you can keep listening for Throne of Glass and /Horror Crescent City crossover callouts.
So with all of that said, if you don't know why we've never cheered so loudly for an engagement ring to literally be melted off a finger, then please go finish the rest of the series. We will be here when you're done.
Next, we Fantasy Fangirls are adults who say adult things about adult books. In other words, folks, this podcast is rated R.
We finally get to talk about Rhysand being the most delicious, handsome, cunning High Lord. And we will be taking every moment we can to appreciate this man. However, in all seriousness, the scenes we're covering in this episode do include triggering topics like domestic abuse and oppression. So please listen at your comfort level.
We also want to let you know that we have some really exciting upcoming events.
We are unbelievably excited to announce that we will be podcasting partners for LeakyCon in Portland, Oregon this July 5th through 7th. Dream come true, it's fine. Here we will be hosting a live podcast, trivia, and tons of other sessions and events. There is a link to a special 10% off discount code in the show notes, and we hope to see you there.
And we're also going to be part of the Dragon Gauntlet event in Boyne City, Michigan this August 16th and 17th. Fantasy Fangirls is headlining with a live show on August 16th, followed by the next day's epic mountainside scavenger hunt, rounding it out with a dragon-themed ball that evening. Link to both events is in the show notes, and we also have extra special discounts for both events for our lovely Patreon members, so be sure to check out your Patreon portal for more details. Speaking of, if you love Fantasy Fangirls and this ACOMAF journey we're on together, if you want more content, more community, more events, and more, please check out our Patreon.
We have 2 tiers that you can join. The Valkyries, which include access to our Boppin' Discord, live Q&As from Lexi and I, community events and book club, plus a special 20% off discounted exclusive merch store. That is all for $5 a month. Or you can join the High Fae, which includes everything from Valkyrie level, plus early access to ad-free episodes, our full episode outlines, and special voting privileges. Basically, our Patreon is amazing. It's the best group of people. I feel so honored.
I know, me too. So join the party at patreon.com/fantasyfangirls. The link is also in the show notes, YouTube caption, however you're listening. And really and truly, thank you so much for supporting us as we turn this dream into our livelihood.
And now it is time to be saved from the spring court. Get me out of here.
Oh, get us out of here. Okay. Like always, Nicole is going to open up this discussion with a summary of what happens in chapters 6 through 12 of ACOMAF. So gather around, friends. We need an Inner Circle Debrief.
Chapter 6. After Rhysand's pitch to help her learn how to read, Feyre's like, nope, I'm good. But Rhysand decides to up the ante. Why not also throw in mind shielding during these reading lessons? But Rhys, king of segues, begins to suggest that maybe, just maybe, Feyre has the power of all 7 High Lords in her. That's a convo for another time, though. We have to space out this several hundred-page book for a reason, because a beautiful blonde walks in the room. Welcome to the chat, Morgan, who does what every best friend meeting the new crush says, and it is, I've heard so much about you. Be cool more. After breakfast, Feyre goes to her first reading lesson and reluctantly begins to read her first line to Rhys. Looks like Rhys took a leaf out of my book, though, because it says, you look absolutely delicious today, Feyre. Delicious. Rhysand leaves her to practice her new skills, but comes back later to go to a new room with a big old map of Prythian, where Rhys drops the biggest knowledge bomb yet. War is coming, Feyre. Way to ease her into day 1, buddy. Chapter 7. Rhys proceeds to drop some first 100 pages of Crescent City level world building knowledge. But Rhys, of course, has another piece of info up his sleeve. Feyre, with the power of all 7 High Lords, could be vital in this upcoming war, but only if she defies Tamlin's stupid no training rule. Do it, Feyre! Fuck the Tamlinarchy!
the Tamlin argument.
Rhys buys and leaves her for the rest of the week to contemplate his offer. But toward the end of her stay, Feyre overhears some interesting information about an Asriel, a Cassian, and something called Illyrians. They're so close to entering our story, I can taste it! Finally, Rhys takes Feyre back to the Spring Court on day 7. Tamlin is overjoyed to see his blushing runaway bride again, but don't worry, they won't ever talk about the fact that she left his ass at the altar. But Feyre notices some difference in decor around the study, noticeably angry scratch marks on the walls. Red flag man, where are you? Instead of taking Feyre away to her bedroom to make sweet, sweet love, Tamlin brings in Lucien, and helps him press
That's not what he likes.
My mind is so in the gutter. What has this job done to me? To help him press Feyre for information about the Night Court. Feyre feels icky, but tells Tamlin everything, including about Rhys's information and how she could play a part in the upcoming war. Tamlin forbids her to train, and Tamlin, continuing to stick his head in the sand, denies that a war will ever happen with Hybern. Chapter 8, Taxes Time. In lieu of TurboTax, the Spring Court does a tithe. But similarly to TurboTax, Feyre was over it about 15 minutes in. However, Tamlin seems to be doing just peachy. A water wraith approaches and explains that she and her kin are unable to pay their tithe because there's no fish left where they live. Tamlin, unwilling to accept her excuses like starvation, tells her that she has 3 days to bring in payment, she can pay double next time, or die. Maybe real world taxes aren't that bad. Feyre is mortified and begs Tamlin to make an exception, but Tamlin explains that he must adhere to the tithes rules, as his family has for generations. Cue Fiddler on the Roof. It's tradition! Feyre leaves the hall and defies Tamlin, giving the water wraith her jewelry so that they can make their payment. Later that night, in the dining room, Feyre and Tamlin argue while Lucien attempts to bridge the peace between these two lovebirds, ? Feyre accidentally enters Lucien's mind and is horrified. Homeboy is a sad boy. Standing to leave the dining room in anger, Feyre notices that there are some handprints burned into the dining room table. Uh-oh, chapter 9. Later, Feyre is talking to Alice and continuing to be the best person in this book. Alice lets Feyre know that while slightly stupid, the water wraith will never forget her debt to Feyre. That might be important for later. After waiting a while for Tamlin to come to bed, Feyre finally decides to go looking for him and finds him in the study, where Tamlin tries to deflect with a "my job is so hard" banter, but he apologizes and gives her an "I'm sorry" gift, a traveling painting kit. Read the room, Timmy Tam. Feyre, getting feisty, asks if she'll be able to use this kit while roaming free throughout the grounds without guards. Tamlin is like, no, just accept your gift. And Feyre comes in with the argument's starting blow, then marry someone who can put up with this.
Ooh, shit!
Feyre, finally feeling like opening up, admits that she is drowning under this hyperprotection. And Tamlin blasts apart the study into smithereens. Chapter 10. Feyre instinctively protects herself with an invisible shield of wind. Oh, like those ones with the powers that she's not allowed to train, and protects herself from the destruction. Tamlin, after multiple attempts to get through Feyre's shield of wind, finally is let in and profusely apologizes. Feyre stares in horror at what just occurred. Montage! Over the next few days, guilty Tamlin eases up on the guards, worships her body, and also spends some time away, not confiding in Feyre. Feyre uses this time of numbing solitude to practice her reading and mind shielding. Then one morning she hears an argument in the hallway and realizes it's Rhys who's come back to call in their bargain for round 2. Feyre, only in a blanket, peeks her head out into the hall and Rhys stares at her in horror, passive-aggressively asking if they've even been feeding her in the Spring Court. Woof. Tamlin, this will shock everyone, begs Rhys to end the bargain, offering him literally anything, much to Feyre's horror. But Rhys does not relent and takes Feyre away. Thank God. Chapter 11. Barely a heartbeat into the Night Court, Rhysand concernedly grills Feyre about how she looks horrible, grade A flirting, and how he felt a blast of terror this past month down the bond. Feyre tells him it's none of your business and shakes off his concern for her well-being. Later, Feyre is reading and Rhys asks if she's given any thought to working with him, but she denies him, not wanting to be a pawn in the High Lord of the Night Court's game, even trading throwing a shoe at him for throwing a book that she's turned into ice. I think I'd take the shoe. The week flies by with Feyre continuing to work on her reading and shielding, and when she returns to the Spring Court, Tamlin is waiting with relentless protection for Feyre. Chapter 12, here we go. Days under heavy guard, Feyre watches Tamlin and Lucien get repeatedly called away, and on the days that he's in the manor, he's held up in his study, talking war strategy with Ianthe and continuing to deny Feyre the right to train. You could say Feyre wants to be in the room where it happens. One day, Tamlin and Lucien are called away, and Feyre, pulling a Tamlin, begs to go with them. But after a repeated no, Tamlin storms out, and there's a shield of hardened air locking Feyre into the house. Feyre, in an absolute panic, uses her powers of darkness, fire, and ice, creating a storm around herself, blacking out and simultaneously melting her engagement band off her finger.
Huzzah!
Gentle hands pick her up, and after a take care of her from Alice, Feyre realizes it's Mor who's come to take her away. Feyre is free!
Thank goodness.
Okay, that's it. Now time to go to Valaris, right?
Right. Feyre having the ability to waterbend means that she's always hydrated, right? Well, maybe not. Because did you know that healthy hydration isn't just about drinking water? It's about water and electrolytes. It makes sense. You lose both water and sodium when you sweat. Both need to be replaced to prevent muscle cramps, headaches, and energy dips. But most people only replace the water. The solution obviously isn't to stop drinking water, though. That'd be silly. It's to drink water plus electrolytes. Enter Element. Element is an electrolyte solution that has enough sodium, potassium, and magnesium to get you feeling and performing your best. Plus, my favorite part is that it has zero sugar, artificial flavors, or other dodgy ingredients to hold you back.
I've been getting back into my HIIT cycling workouts again, and I've been having Element basically every single day, and I've been trying new flavors left and right. Like recently, actually this morning, I'm drinking it. I tried the raspberry salt for the first time, and
that's one of my favorites.
It might be up there with mango chili, which is my absolute top favorite. I was so blown away by all of Element's flavors. I'm truly having a different one every single day. It's awesome. And no matter what, you are guaranteed to find an Element flavor that you love.
Element came up with a fantastic offer for us. Go to drinklmnt.com/FFG to get a free sample pack with any purchase. Thanks, Element. It's time to step into the cauldron and discuss key insights, character analysis, foreshadowing, theories, and so much more. Let's kick it off right where we left off last episode with Feyre's first reading lesson. But before we go into that, let's first analyze why is Rhys wanting to teach her how to read? Because yes, there's the obvious reasons that he shares with her. She's going to be a High Lord's wife, and there are tasks that simply require reading and writing, like maintaining correspondence and giving speeches. He also mentions that it serves several purposes of his, which we will later learn is the hope that Feyre will be able to read the Book of Breathings once it is in their possession, because only those who are made can read it and nullify the cauldron. And if she can read the book, she can be a vital asset in the coming war.
And we should note that it's not necessarily even that she has to read it, she has to read the spell. So while Amren is the only one who will be able to read the interesting markings in the Book of Breathings, it is the spell that comes from the Book of Breathings that she meaning Feyre, has to read in order to nullify the cauldron. I know that's confused a lot of people. I didn't really fully understand it, I feel like, until the deep dive.
I didn't realize that either. However, it will end up being in a different language, so she won't even be able to read it no matter what, right?
True, but since she is made, it is only those who are made who can speak the spell in order to nullify the cauldron. So like, for instance, if Mor were to use the same like phonetic pronunciation that Amren gives Feyre, it wouldn't work because Mor wasn't made. But since Feyre was, she is able to read it.
But let's be honest, Rhys is being very surface level here with his reasoning, even joking about embroidering sweet phrases onto pillows.
Fuck you, Tamlin. That's what I would embroider on my pillow.
For instance, he doesn't just want Feyre to learn how to read and write because it's essentially unavoidable as Tamlin's wife. But I'm willing to bet that if Feyre is indeed going to be Tamlin's wife, Rhys wants her to be more capable so she has at least the chance to be involved. Rhys doesn't just want her to be Tamlin's pretty wife. He knows that's not Feyre at her core, so he wants to help her have the skills and know-how to be a key political figure at Tamlin's side. As much as he hates the fact that she is at Tamlin's side, that's beside the point here.
But I also want to point out that in A Court of Frost and Starlight, it is noted that she's doing a lot of paperwork, but for the Night Court. I don't think he's actively thinking this, but I do think there's a small subconscious part of him that's like, it would also be nice if she knows how to do paperwork for the Night Court. Again, I do not think it's conscious. I think it would be definitely subconscious because he's not letting himself get hopeful for a future with Feyre right now. But also I want to point out that this is what helps them be able to pass their notes back and forth and like the fantasy flirt texting. Honestly, that's one of my favorite parts of this book. I cannot wait to cover it. But it does help her be able to do that, which is a good part to their getting to know each other part of the story. It's also important to note that while him teaching her how to both read and shield is quite the generous offer, her immediate gut reaction is absolutely shut it down, deny him. And it makes sense. He mocked her under the mountain for being an illiterate human. Not to mention, this is something that is deeply rooted in shame and embarrassment for her. She literally fell apart after the second task. Let's not forget that. The last thing she wants to have happen is for him to mock her again or her be put back in a situation where she feels less than. She has enough already of that from another High Lord. So she's like, absolutely not. I do not want to be put back in that situation again.
Exactly. Well, and then what's more, Rhys knows Feyre is free-falling since Under the Mountain. We've talked a lot about how Feyre is a goal-oriented person at her core. But without a goal these past several months, she has lost her sense of purpose. She literally doesn't know what to do with herself on a day-to-day basis and with the rest of her life.
Not to mention, others are denying her the ability to have a goal with meaning, I should say. They tell her to go paint or plan parties, which you could view as a goal, but both of those are either triggering for Feyre or wildly unfulfilling. And when we finally get the opportunity for her to have a goal and go help the fairies in the village, like last episode, the villagers tell her the debt is paid, the debt is paid, the debt is paid, and basically brush her off. And Lucien tells her that she reminds them of their horrors. So no matter what, she's being pushed aside for all of these goals, and it's no wonder she feels aimless.
This hopelessness has been compounding and contributing to her depression, and Rhys wants to help give her something to focus on, not just with reading, but with her shielding lessons as well. He's assigning her a purpose, as small and trivial as it might seem. But ultimately, learning how to read and write, it's not trivial at all. It will open up so many possibilities for Feyre, starting with how she'll begin spending her days reading in the Spring Court, and she'll think how only the company of these characters and escaping into these worlds kept her from teetering into utter despair, which we can certainly all relate to. That's why we listeners read these stories about fairies and Prythian and dragons and magic. Same goes for learning how to shield. She's been fed this narrative of pretending she doesn't have Fae powers, but this is such a useful skill that will help her have purpose and ownership of her new body and self. No matter Tamlin's reasoning, he is doing her a huge disservice by not helping her learn how to shield. It's something he and Lucien certainly know how to do, but I bet his reasoning would be, I'll never let anyone near you, so you don't even need to know how to shield. Except she's going to Rhys's night court 1 week every month. You kind of think that Tamlin would want her to learn how to shield against him. It just goes to show how head in the sand he's being about her being Fae. Not just with her big High Lord powers, but simply having any Fae powers and learning how to use them.
Well, I also want to point out that in ACOWAR, when Dagden and Branna come to the Spring Court, they are Damati. And Feyre has to protect both her mind and Lucien and Tamlin's mind from being infiltrated. So you say that they have shields. I don't think they're practiced in them, though. I do think they know how to shield because they are, of higher status in the Fae world. Absolutely. They were taught that skill, but I think they're so unpracticed in it that it does not even cross their minds. But everything you're saying is valid. It's actually wild.
Well, if they're not shielding themselves just constantly, or maybe it's just, there's different levels of shields, so to speak, so I would assume that they are shielding and then the Damati just break through it because, they're extra strong and all of that. And it also just goes to show Tamlin, he's both a trusting guy and not a trusting guy. He's inactive. That's what it is.
It's always back to his inaction.
A few more reasons here about why Rhys is insisting Feyre learn how to read. It's helping her conquer one of her biggest insecurities. Nicole was saying this earlier. We discussed in our ACOTAR deep dive how Feyre's illiteracy has been a driving force in her negative self-talk, and she is so self-conscious about how she can't read. So why not give her some of that control back? Rhys is here to empower her with the ability to read and write so she can overcome this insecurity and shut up that mean Nesta voice in her head.
This is the beginning of him teaching her how to take her own power back. The Weaver is a great example of this. Like, he constantly is pushing not only her, but also other members of his court to grow, to expand, to be better every single day. It's why he is such a good leader, but this is really the first opportunity of him handing that to her, at least in the Night Court. He did a little bit under the mountain, but he also had a lot of other ulterior motives that definitely clouded it.
Well, and the exact same goes for teaching her how to shield. It's not her biggest insecurity by any means, but she is right here, right now, very self-conscious that Rhys can go into her head whenever he pleases. So he's offering her a way to take back control for herself. And the last reason to round out this whole long list, this is a rather innocent way in with Feyre. These interactions focused around reading and shielding give Rhys the opportunity to begin building trust with her brick by brick. He's playful, he's a good teacher, he pushes her because he knows she's capable, and he praises her when she makes progress. Even though she acts like she doesn't want to hear it, but truthfully, Feyre needed to hear some words of affirmation when all she's heard is no, 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 no for months. Feyre touches a nerve. She says, "Don't get me started on what you did to me under the mountain." And it's like Rhys has a physical reaction where it's like his emotional response is so strong it spills out into something physical and momentarily uncontrollable.
This also raised a lot of like, whoa, to me when I was reading this. It almost feels like he's worried he went too far under the mountain. I mean, like, obviously this is a worry of his, but like, it's really being shoved back in his face. And he's worried that because of that, it will never allow him to be in her good graces or allow her to even trust him on a tiny level. I do wonder how many nights he dreams about the horrors he made her endure under the mountain. We know that he dreams a lot about Amarantha, but he also did some stuff to Feyre that he is not proud of from under the mountain. And he was almost hopeful for her to come to the Night Court and also ease that anxiety that he was feeling like, oh my gosh, is she still thinking about this? But here she is saying, no, I still think about this. I still think about what you did to me under the mountain, which is why I think the next line is, quote, "But then his chest began to move faster and faster." It's his worries, it's his anxieties literally being thrown in his face. We should mention fairly. What he did to her under the mountain, not cool. We did discuss it at length in our ACOTAR deep dives. I do wonder if Moore hadn't walked in, would he have apologized? Would he told her the whole reasons of, like, you know, a whole chapter 54, maybe minus the obvious mate confession? I do think an "I'm sorry," even without an explanation, might have gone a long way here, Rhys.
Maybe.
I think it would have, because she hasn't heard that. She's only heard that she's in the wrong, like whether that's in subtext
true.
or actual text.
I think she would probably pretend like it doesn't matter to her, of course. But it would be like another seed planting of that trust being able to flourish later on. Yep.
Exactly.
Well, and in comes Moore, and we get an official introduction. And we immediately appreciate the air of genuine friendliness and playfulness she brings to this rather intensifying scene after Feyre mentioned what Rhys did under the mountain.
With the introduction of Moore and the start of the Inner Circle, we also get a much more casual and vulgar language entering our story. But yes, I love it. Mentioning how she would enjoy seeing Rhys's balls nailed to the wall. I mean, like, that is just such a stark difference from what we've been experiencing. We had a little bit of it last book with Lucien, but it is on full display here on what we can expect from the Inner Circle.
They would do so well on Fantasy Fangirls.
I want you to just imagine Cassian and, like, honestly, a Cassian and Feyre drunk episode. I would be so here for that. That would be amazing.
Oh my gosh, me too. Now, I know that there is an air of mystery around Moore among ACOTAR fans. There are some theories that she is the master manipulator even, and none of us understand what the power of truth means. Like, none of us really do. We are going to be exploring all of that way further on, but right now we are focusing on what we're reading right now in front of us, and we're just so excited that she's in our story.
Well, I do want to bring one possible point to the table here, and that is Feyre mentions how it's nice to meet Moore, and Moore retorts back with a, quote, "Liar, you want nothing to do with us, do you?" This could be her just, reading the room. Moore is 500 years old. She is probably very good about reading body language, looking at you, Tamlin. Or this also could be an example of her using her powers of being able to, I'll call it almost lie detect. I'm going to assume this would be one of her powers, not her power? Can she tell when people are telling the truth versus lying? Based off of Moore's demeanor, though, and what we know about the Inner Circle, I'm leaning towards her powers being more matter of fact, but we'll get into obviously a lot more theories about Moore's powers and everything later on. But I do love this idea about her being like a walking lie detector. I think that would be really cool. I do feel like it would have been used a lot more, though, if it were the case.
Yeah, but I hear you on that. Yeah, I had not thought of that there. Well, as we meet Moore, we have not met a single character like her yet. She's charming and she's enthusiastic. She's immediately hugging Feyre versus accepting Feyre's awkward handshake. I love that.
But at the same time, she's described as like grounded and alert. She is one of the first females we have seen in the story who is described as similar to a warrior who carries herself as if she's familiar with weapons. It is perfectly setting her up so we believe immediately, yep, she is Rhys's third in command.
And then she's teasing Rhys, but she's also teasing Feyre and sets the precedent that there's no bullshit politics in this little circle. She calls Feyre out on how she wants nothing to do with the Night Court and wicked Rhys is making you sit here. I gotta say, I feel like she's saying in a really nice way, oh, poor you, having to sit and eat a great breakfast in a beautiful place with someone who loves and cares about you. And then I think Rhys's, you're perky today, is his way of being like, dang, you went there, huh? And a little bit of a warning to pull back, like dial it back from a 10 to like an 8.
Interesting. I did not get that at all. I took it as like just digging into Rhys over and over again. It does feel a little bit like the whole you're perky today. It does feel a little bit like, be cool in front of my crush, cousin. Yeah. I want to quick shouts to our cousin, Allison, who would 100% do this just like Moore did in this.
Oh, absolutely. But again, nothing from this interaction is malicious or meant to put Feyre in her place. Rather, it's establishing trust and casualness, which Feyre honestly needs so badly, especially compared to how stiff and political everything is in the Spring Court. And it's not only creating a safe space that includes Feyre, but it's showing how normal Rhys can be. Feyre and the reader have really only seen him interact with his enemies up until now, and it humanizes him and sets us up for the Inner Circle dynamic. Because I think deep down, Moore knows that this is going to happen between Feyre and Rhys. She's the only one Rhys has told at this time that they're mates. So she's already taking on the sisterly role, feeling like Feyre is part of the family, to the point where she almost says where she was instead of under the mountain, which we can assume is Valaris. And Rhys is like, nope, not yet. Cut it.
This was a moment like, whoa, what? Did she almost slip that? Like, she is shipping these two so hard that she already views Feyre as like 100% trustworthy, where she almost told her a 5,000-year-old secret. That is amazing. And she is already viewing her as a family member, which is so much to Moore's character. I love that we even see Rhys go as far as like to roll his eyes at Moore and quote, "It was the most human gesture I've ever seen him make." This is a whole new side of Rhys who is comfortable, who is at ease, who is with his family, and dare I say, who is in a normal position. It's about fucking time.
Moore is instantly the kind of friend that is, sadly, foreign to Feyre. Feyre's relationship with Elaine would probably be the closest to this, but Elaine does not have that same merry but alert quality to her. She's a kind-hearted and warm Hufflepuff, while Moore is a headstrong, confident, don't mess with me or my loved ones Gryffindor. Feyre doesn't realize how much she needs someone like Moore in her life, who she can look to for hope that she too can overcome the horrors in her life. She recognizes how much Feyre needs a friend. And at the same time, though, she knows not to push her friendship on her. Moore makes herself available, but lets Feyre make the first move because she understands respecting her privacy.
Honestly, everyone needs a Moore in their life. I feel like everyone needs a Moore kind of best friend. You're my Moore kind of best friend. I love you.
Oh, you're mine. She also reminds me a lot of Rhiannon in Fourth Wing.
Yes, definitely. Yep. Absolutely.
Yes. And even though we love Rhys, I can appreciate why Feyre is having so much difficulty in his presence. Last episode, we talked about how it's understandable that Feyre has some serious reservations about the Night Court and how, despite what Rhys did for her in the end of ACOTAR, she's been convinced he is her enemy. We'll talk more about this concept of enemies in a little while here in today's episode, but for now, Feyre notes that she would be a, quote, damned fool not to take up the offer to learn from him. For one, he's the most powerful High Lord there is, and he's offering to train her. That's a pretty big deal of an offer, so why not say yes to this?
Especially when it comes to the shielding part. Like, it's like learning piano from the world's greatest pianist. Of course you're going to take him up on that, naturally.
Yes. She keeps being told her powers aren't a big deal, or rather, there's no discussion of her powers at all, leading her to believe that it's no big deal in the spring court, and she doesn't need to train to do anything about her powers because that would go against the spring court's mission to seem like a unified front of peace. Plus, Tamlin is so dead set on hiding her from the rest of the High Lords that he's like, nope, we're going to pretend like you don't have powers and no one will ever know about it. I'm sorry, but how long did he think he could keep this up? By refusing to acknowledge that Feyre needs some kind of training, any kind of training with her Fae powers. Now, I'm not even talking about the special gifts from the High Lords. I mean regular Fae powers, like shielding, for instance. Now she is getting a chance to learn from someone who wants to teach her, to help her do something about her new Fae power. And that bit of assistance, when all she's gotten so far is resistance, empowers her to throw herself into her lessons, simple as they may seem. It goes right back to that need to have a goal, to wake up and have a purpose for the day. All the same, it's hard for Feyre to endure Rhys's presence. They're no longer under the mountain, but she remembers their power dynamic there very well, where she served as his pet, for lack of a better term. Like, that's pretty much what she was down there. Now, in this rather normal setting, it feels unsettling. Like, she's a survivalist, and it's like fight or flight mode for her. He even asks if it's that hard for her to try in front of him. And the simple answer is yes. And I understand why.
Not to mention, it goes to show that this is such a deep-rooted insecurity of hers, like we talked about. But he also knows that. And I love that because he knows that this is such a triggering thing from her, he combats the like all too seriousness of this lesson with playful sentences that he knows will make him excited, like make him all playful, but also will make her angry. But it's like it's a playful angry. It's not entirely like, I'm going to nail your balls to the wall. It's like you look absolutely delicious today, Feyre. Like, that's what you wrote? Are you serious? He knows that having her focus on anger towards him will change her focus from being ashamed of her lack of education and directing her focus on her. It's kind of brilliant. It's a little manipulative, but I think it's like for the greater good kind of manipulative.
His primary aid in helping Feyre so far in the series is getting her angry, to be driven by that fire, so not to break, to pull herself out and just feel something.
But then it's time for Rhys's first piece of dating advice for ACOMAF. After she reads his sultry sentences, he breaks into her mind and apparently, seeing that it's not enough for him to just speak into her mind, he seizes control over her body, her blood, to the point where she cannot even blink unless he wields it. He's done this before with the intention of scaring the fuck out of her and Tamlin so that he will send her away. This was back in ACOTAR. He is now trying to make her feel safe in a new court. And yes, teach her a new skill. And by highlighting, the importance of learning how to shield. Yes, I understand that this is an important lesson, but this is not the way to do it. Break into her mind, give your little monologue about what happens if she leaves her shields down. Maybe hey, remember that one time I did that one thing and freaked you out? This is I'm giving Rhys a D- right here, and the D stands for Tay-Body. She kicks him out though, which, yay, I'm so proud. And she puts a solid wall of adamant. Yep, you bet it is time for Metal Watch. Adamant is a fictional ore that in Greek mythology was the unbreakable metal of the gods and was seen as unconquerable and untamable. I was today years old when I learned that adamant wasn't real. I thought it was.
I honestly thought it was real too, but no, it's not. Are you serious? I feel like I need to look that up because I don't believe you.
Please Google it. I guarantee it is not. It is a fictional metal. But this all sounds about right for our girl. It is the unbreakable metal. It is the most intense metal there is out there, at least in fictional land, because it's not real. So I just think that's
I still don't know if I believe you.
Google it. Google it right now. It is not real.
A bunch of our listeners are pausing this right now to go and check it, and the other half are like, duh.
But But Rhys, being ever the tutor, compliments her and acknowledges that he is most certainly a pig, but look at her reading a whole sentence and shielding.
He accepts the role of being hated by her. In chapter 54, he'll admit that her hatred of him is better than facing the alternatives, that she feels nothing or that she might feel something similar.
Feyre's first reaction, though, to this compliment is, "Don't condescend me." This is so sad and massive insight to Feyre and how she's been treated in regards to specifically her education in the past, thinking that people will always mock her for her lack of it. And Rhys encourages her. Finally, someone is actually encouraging and, dare I say, supporting Feyre. He tells her to keep practicing and that she could be reading novels by Ninsar. Did Rhys just give Feyre a SMART goal? Because I think he did. Not only giving her a goal to work towards, but now he has a date attached to said goal. That is my headcanon.
I love it. Again, he's such a Ravenclaw.
He's such a Ravenclaw. It's actually brilliant.
And then Feyre tries to convince Rhys to let her out of the bargain. She doesn't understand why. If he is such a good guy after all, why is he holding her to this bargain? Because it doesn't seem like he's getting anything out of it besides just tormenting Tamlin. Personally, I would have pulled a Jon Snow move and been like, but I did die, so technically I should be out of this bargain because I did live the rest of my life under the mountain. I don't think that would work with Rhys, and who are we kidding? I would not try to get out of a bargain where I get to live on the top of a mountain with an infinity bath, and that's just me though. And like every other time when we need a little bit of insight into Rhys's perspective, let's pull what he says about the bargain in chapter 54. Quote, "When you finally came here, I decided I wouldn't tell you any of it, and I wouldn't let you out of the bargain because your hatred was better than facing the two alternatives, that you felt nothing for me or that you might feel something similar. And if I let myself love you, you would be taken from me, the way my family was, the way my friends were. So I didn't tell you. I watched as you faded away." Feyre is treating him like he's the bad guy who kidnapped her, which I get, but at the same time, Feyre, you agreed to this bargain. In desperation, yes, but you agreed to it, and it's actually turning out a lot better than you anticipated. Like, you thought you were going to be in a dungeon. Anyway, Rhys says with darkened eyes that he is not her enemy. And instead of listening to her own heart, which we have to remember, she has acknowledged to herself twice now that he does not seem to actually be her enemy, she leans on Tamlin and the Spring Court. They say Rhys is her enemy, and that if she questions them on this, then what else should she be questioning them on? She's dismissing her own thoughts, not even willing to think them into existence here, because she's been taught that what she thinks is not important. God, I fucking hate the Spring Court so much. Anyway, and hey, I just gotta say it. I get why Tamlin and Lucien and, quote, everyone else thinks this about Rhys. He has been their enemy in many, many, many different ways, both regarding Amarantha and before with the bloody feuds between the Night and Spring Courts. But just because Rhys is Tamlin's enemy does not automatically make him everyone's enemy. And that's really what a lot of the series is about, uncovering the definition of enemies and learning to trust, especially in the first half of this book for Feyre as she learns to trust her own instinct and judgment. All the while, hearing the woman he loves say that he's her enemy must be just heartbreaking for Rhys, hence why his eyes are darkening, his face is grave, telltale signs. It's probably why this conversation leads to him laying the truth out about how they had Feyre wrapped up like she was Tamlin's reward.
And Feyre's response to that is, so? And Rhys is like, the fuck so? What do you mean? And this is such an important moment.
Yes, again, it shows just how much Feyre is drinking the Kool-Aid in the Spring Court when she fires back so about being wrapped up like Tamlin's present. It's what she's supposed to do as his wife. It's what her future is supposed to look like. So she's actively convincing herself that this is what she wants her life to be like too. That yes, everything she did was for Tamlin. So why wouldn't her being wrapped up like his reward be any different? She's lost her sense of self and she's a shell. All her needs and desires stripped of her because they don't matter. And she's too far gone to truly acknowledge them on her own, which pisses Rhys off, to say the very least, because he knows that's not her. He fell in love with the human girl who threw a bone at Amarantha after defeating her first impossible task. This defeated person here, letting everyone else walk all over her, is worse than anything for Rhys because he knows what she is capable of, her innate stubbornness and fire.
Rhys takes Feyre up to a tower with all the maps.
I gotta say, I find it interesting that he first asks her what she sees.
I feel like that's such a Dumbledore way of teaching, right? Where it's always asking questions. And I say that not as a dig. I say that as like a huge praise because Dumbledore is the best teacher ever. But, well, in some ways. But,
let's not open up that can of worms.
It's always asking her to, it goes back to that, let me push you, let me help you expand and grow and start to think for yourself again.
Yes. And when Feyre responds that it's a world divided in two, Rhys asks her if she thinks it should remain that way. I gotta kind of ask, I know it's kind of rhetorical, but it kind of isn't at the same time, because I wonder if he's feeling her out, testing her as someone who has experienced the human world and Prythian and kind of served as a bridge between the two of them. What does this human turned Fae feel about the wall, about Prythian divided? I think he might be asking her a real genuine question. Do you think that it should be divided, to get her stance instead of solely that rhetorical question you would automatically think when you read it.
I absolutely agree. And again, I think he's asking her that. That's something she's never asked in the Spring Court, ever.
She's not even in the room when it happens, yeah.
The room where it happens. But it's getting her back into critically thinking for herself. And by asking a question that she would not even remotely be asked in the Spring Court, it kind of shocks her out of that and into, ooh, what do I actually think? But then he tells Feyre that war is coming. More on this in just a moment. But Feyre's first reaction, oh God, is not even asking. It is begging Rhys not to invade. She thinks that he is acting with Hybern's plans. Woof! This is a blatant neon sign to Rhys about what his mate thinks of him. He even says back to her, quote, "You truly think I'm a monster even after everything?" That's not a question. That is a statement. It's a realization. You can almost hear his heartbreak in that sentence.
I know he's going to tell her soon, but come on, Rhys, you really got to tell Feyre that you fought alongside the humans, not against them. Which, again, I can appreciate why Feyre thinks this, that he is a monster, because after all, Feyre doesn't know yet how big of an oopsie Rhys made in his role with Claire. She does not know any of the Claire context here, except that he gave that name and a human girl died and is probably still nailed to the wall in the crumbled up under the mountain.
Let's hear the flies buzzing around. At least there's not a court now smelling her. That's terrible to say, Nicole. Poor girl's tortured for months and then strung up to die.
I think they also did just destroy under the mountain too. So
I hope someone just burned her body. Maybe
I hope so too.
Ashes. That'll be our headcanon. Maybe.
Yes.
Because they're also Kelpies just going to go in there and just take her body and do I'm not going to say that into a microphone. Nicole,
wow, that went really dark. Okay.
Are we okay today? We are really dark. Jesus.
It's because we're the goddamn Spring Court too much.
But Rhys goes on to explain that this is the nasty King of Hybern's plan. For over 100 years, the King of Hybern has been planning his attack on Prythian and on the continent. Amarantha was a 50-year experiment to see how easily Prythian could fall with the use of his magic. Remember, Amarantha was a general of Hybern who went rogue, and the King of Hybern didn't punish her for this. And we were like, why is he not punishing her? This is why. He's like, I'm going to watch and see how this goes for you, because he's more powerful than her. If she ruled and she fell and everything of Prythian fell, he could go in and crush her, and then she just did all of his work for him. His plan is to claim all of Prythian and the human lands, which means destroying the wall. But this is actually just his step one. He wants to remove Prythian off the map so that they will not be a problem when he goes to take the full continent on the other side of Prythian.
We also start to get a little hint of resistance about Tamlin from Feyre. Yay! Her first reaction is, but Tamlin hasn't said anything about an oncoming war. But she can't even finish the sentence because she realizes that he wouldn't tell her. But she realizes there's enough activity going on around the manor with so many meetings and patrols and lots of tension. And she's like, well, fuck.
Yeah,
that's why.
I do have a question for you, Lexi, because Rhys mentions that back in the last war, there was something called the Mortal Fairy Alliance. Number one, is this still a thing? And number two, if so, Is this what Papa Archeron is a part of? We know that he is at a big conference on the continent to talk about the threat above the wall. If he is on the Alliance board, we'll say, is this where he ran off to last book when Feyre was leaving to like write his comrades of like, Mortal Fae Alliance, here we go. This is my canon. Now this is canon in my head.
I don't know if they're there yet with the Alliance part of it, but I do think that the mortals are banding together. Like we already know that from the Mortal Queens, but I don't think the fairies are involved quite yet because it didn't seem like they were really working together until Lucian is the one who goes, and then the fairies and Papa Archeron, and then also Miriam and all of them, they all kind of like see each other and meet up together versus all banding together beforehand and going as a unit.
Maybe there's another fairy who's just like the spokesperson on the continent, because there's a whole fairy
There's so much about the continent. Like, don't get me started on what we don't know about the continent. I think it's actually really fascinating that we don't get a whole lot of information about it. But as far as, you know, like it makes total sense about the Mortal Fairy Alliance back from during the last war. And you got to think about Mor was a key person in that alliance there. And so I'm willing to bet that no, it's not really a thing right now. But when Lucian goes as essentially the emissary for the Fae, that's where then that alliance does come into play then towards the end of Act War there.
So maybe it's just the Mortal Alliance right now, and that's where
Yes, I do absolutely believe that. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, God. As Rhys is telling Feyre about the possible allies to Hybern, he mentions, quote, High Priestesses angling for control like wolves around a carcass. And Feyre thinks that while Ianthe is ambitious, she's her friend and completely dismisses her as a threat. We will later learn that this dismissal is wildly incorrect, but Rhys, I think he's directly hinting at Ianthe right here, because he must either know or minimum guess that Ianthe is trying to break into the Spring Court, for lack of a better term.
Yes, I don't think quite to the extent that she actually is,
no,
where she's actively working with Hybern, but I do think that he knows that she's very ambitious. He knows what her ultimate goal is. I imagine Ianthe is part of who he's talking about, but I think he's also probably referring to the High Priestesses who are embedded in the Dawn Court, Day Court, and Winter Court, which two of those courts have untested High Lords right now, Helion and Kallias. However, I will say it's a little bit unclear when these High Priestesses weaseled their way into these courts, like if it was before Amarantha or just in the 3 months since. Probably both. There's a little bit of vagueness around that. So yes, I think that he is certainly including Ianthe in that, but she is not the sole person that he is singling out. And then Rhys lays out another reason the bargain is beneficial. Feyre can serve as the middleman between Rhys and Tamlin, which, oh dear. Feyre defends Tamlin, saying he would never help the King of Hybern. Well, and Rhys isn't so much worried about Tamlin allying with Hybern as he is about Tamlin doing nothing. God. This reread is real fun, all. Is Tamlin willing to fight when things get tough? Is he willing to use leverage and be strategic?
No.
I don't know. I feel like Rhys is asking a lot of Tamlin. That's the point here. Yeah, that's definitely something to question about Tamlin. It's not a given like you would think it would be with a High Lord. It is a literally like, is Tamlin going to do anything? Because he hasn't done anything really in a long time. So is he going to step it up? And it's like, I don't know. It's a fair question.
Fair question. Oh, God. The answer is yes, but terribly. He just does
God. Yeah,
things.
it's like opposite direction. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I love Rhys's observations about Feyre's power and strength. They're quite, what would you say, interesting?
Interesting.
First of all, we get a little insight into just how much Tamlin, Lucian, and Ianthe are trying to downplay her powers. I know we've already been talking about that, but that is really just front and center here.
Well, and thus she is downplaying her powers, she meaning Feyre. As soon as Rhys brings them up, she's like, I don't have powers? What powers? I don't have any powers. I don't know what you're talking about. And she immediately notes in her inner monologue, she's like, wow, way to play it cool, Feyre. That sounded just like denial. Last episode, we noted about how it's so important for us readers to know how different human Feyre and High Fae Feyre and how different their bodies are, how different her movements are. When she's describing them in, I think it's like chapter 2, she mentions how she shattered doors by closing them too hard. She's mentioned how she's clumsy and breaking things. it's mentioned in an almost embarrassed-like error, to the sentence structure. And she's been downplaying her Hulk-like strength. And it's almost an embarrassment. Which, side note, I do have a question. If this is demonstration of a High Lord's power, is super strength from a High Lord specifically, or is it just a general?
If it was specifically from a High Lord, I would assume Tamlin.
Same.
But I'm going to guess that it's more of a High Lord general power, showing that they are power versus having power.
That.
She is essentially, and Rhys is going to say this to her, she is a High Lord here, and therefore she is power, and she has those same crazy powerful capabilities as they all do, which I believe does include strength.
Yeah.
On that same note, Rhys emphasizes again how unique and strong her powers are, which Feyre honestly did not know because, of course, Tamlin and company have kept this from her. One more thing that they didn't tell her, but this thing is directly related to her and her powers, not an oncoming war that might affect everybody, but literally it is about her and her powers that she is fearful of. I'm willing to bet that they're all so scared of her powers for different reasons. Ianthe has her reasons, Tamlin has his reasons and whatnot, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Rhys does say that the powers she is displaying are usually the first indications among the Fae that a High Lord's son might become his heir.
Can we just alarm this for a second? Because this is a huge moment for our girl. Under the mountain, Rhys was one of the only, if not the only person actually rooting and believing in Feyre. And we're right back with it here. He is saying, you have something special. You are something special. Tap into it. Rise up. And Feyre even notes, she says, quote, that thing I felt underneath my skin, ... This is the fantasy shit I love. It might not be the full, you're the chosen one, but it is kind of equivalent to, you're a wizard, Harry. And Feyre's like, I'm a what? This is full-blown Hagrid and Harry scene right here.
We'll talk more about the signs of being a High Lord's heir and how this directly ties to her ability to be a High Lady way later on. So let's just pocket this information for now, that Feyre is showing High Lord signs way ahead of her becoming a High Lady. And it will be key in my personal argument that yes, she is deserving of being a High Lady.
It does kind of bother me in ACOWAR when Rhys is like, I made her High Lady because I love her. Her powers were one of the last things I considered. I would have been like, yeah, her powers were the first thing I considered. She's deserving of this title. But We'll get to that later. As Feyre continues to make excuses for not training her powers, she mentions how Tamlin won't allow it and how she is his subject and he is her High Lord. And Rhys, wonderful Daddy Rhys, says, you are no one's subject. This is why we love Rhysand. He fully believes that she is her own person with her own choices. We are going to be talking about choice extensively throughout this book. And he is seeing someone brainwash her into believing that she does not have a say over her own life. And it's infuriating for him, naturally. He is beyond anger that his mate, remember, his equal, he is the most powerful High Lord in existence. His equal is being made to feel less than.
Especially by Tamlin, who Rhys doesn't feel is a good leader, and he's so passive himself. And so he's like, this idiot, you think you're less than him? We cannot forget that Tamlin begs at Rhys's feet, and now this guy is making the woman Rhys loves feel less than. He's okay with letting Feyre go if she's happy and healthy, but it's so hard for him to accept this, knowing that things are not the way that they should be, even if it's with Tamlin. Feyre is no longer a human, and Rhys is like, you gotta stop letting people treat you like you're still a human when you're more powerful than any of them.
But then Rhys comes in with the slap shot. Quote, but I know you more than you realize, I think. And I don't believe for one damn minute that you're remotely fine with being a pretty trophy for someone who sat on his ass for nearly 50 years, then sat on his ass while you were shredded apart. Oh, yes, I love so many things about this. Number one, the mating bond foreshadowing just dropped in there. The I know you more than you realize, I think. He's right. He is trying to snap her out of putting Tamlin on this stupid pedestal. And while she continues trying to shut him up and shut him out, this does hit her and start to minutely change how she interacts with Tamlin, at least for the first 2 hours after she gets back from the night court. It's very short. for obvious reasons that we'll get into later.
It's like when you're away from that toxic partner for just 5 seconds and a loved one who cares for you has to practically shake your shoulders and give you the truth of the matter. And it just clears your head a little bit, just a little bit, planting the seeds, even if they take a very long time to grow.
I'll even throw in like a toxic friend. Like if you have a toxic friend and you're with another friend or a therapist or a family member and you're talking about it and the family member or friend or therapist is like, what the fuck? And it's like, oh, you just don't realize it when you're immersed in it. Yep. But despite Rhys's anger, he again gives Feyre the choice. It is always about choice with him, reminding her that she has power and command over her damn destiny.
She's never truly heard this. Even during their love story, Tamlin bossed her around and dictated the majority of things. Yes, like at the very beginning, he's like, you can go wherever you want here, but I personally don't know if he actually would have followed through with that. And he was like, like, oh, of course you can do whatever you want here. Like, I'm not talking about those choices. She got to choose to paint and what she could wear back then, but she didn't have a choice in the bigger matters, like to stay versus go back to the human world. She also didn't have a choice when her family was in poverty. She did what she had to do so her family literally would not die. And for the first time, someone is giving her permission to make her own choices. And when she's that far gone, she needs that emphasis on choice and why it should be only hers to make. As Feyre improves her reading, she's going to be overwhelmed with all the book choices out there. But luckily with Book of the Month, she doesn't need to scour the library because every single month, Book of the Month will send you a list of the best new titles. Book of the Month is more than just a subscription service. It's like having a personal book curator.
I recently picked out How to End a Love Story by Yuling Kwong from their list, and I'm so excited to dive into it. It's going to be my new poolside read. I'm very jazzed. They make it so easy for you to find your next read, and I love that it's always a variety of genres, which means you get to try new things. Like I'm giving this contemporary romance a try and I'm very, very excited. And the best part, they offer all these amazing books at fantastic prices and shipping is always free. Plus their loyalty program is the cherry on top, offering you even better deals the longer you stick around.
No matter which books you choose, you're in for a treat. Book of the Month focuses on new and emerging authors, which allows them to offer books their members would not have found otherwise. The convenience of their service is impeccable, and there's always something for every type of reader.
Right now, you can head over to bookofthemonth.com and snag your first book for a mere $5 by using the code PASTEL. We truly cannot recommend Book of the Month enough. It's not just about receiving books, it's about the joy of new discoveries. That's bookofthemonth.com and using code PASTEL to get your first book for $5. After quite literally turning Feyre's world upside down with all of this info, she does not see Rhysand for the rest of the week. And I'm not going to lie, this was quite shocking to me on a first read, but it does make sense. Going back to choice, he is giving her space to figure this out for herself without influence from another person. Again, it is just A+ stuff from Rhys. Speaking of A+ stuff, I gotta take a moment and give Rhys a massive gold star for his flirting efforts because, quote, Rhysand is the most handsome High Lord. Rhysand is the most delightful High Lord. Rhysand is the most cunning High Lord. I love a confident flirter. This is iconic shit right now. I love him so much.
It's also like maybe if she just keeps writing this out, maybe her subconscious will pick up on it.
Listen, there is science behind that. It's not out of the question. But Feyre walks in on Mor and Rhys having a meeting about a temple in Césaire being sacked.
Césaire is a small city in the northeast part of the Night Court territory, and it is one of the very few known towns in the Night Court that others know about. Césaire is one of the 3 temples being targeted and ransacked by the King of Hybern's forces, though we don't know all this yet. He's attacking these temples because the feet of the Cauldron are hidden in them, and without the feet, some of the Cauldron's power is fractured. I just can never get over these Cauldron feet conversation. I'm going to have a lot to say about the Cauldron later on, but
I just imagine these full like iron feet, like a mold of a foot in iron. And it's just like, that's what the base of the Cauldron is.
There is a reason why I think Throne of Glass series has way better plot devices than this. I will just leave it at that. I love ACOTAR, don't get me wrong. That has the best characters, the best places. But the Cauldron feet? Anyway, the king is activating the Cauldron again, and he wants it at full power without a wisp missing. Therefore, that's why he needs all these feet.
You know, wiki feet, but it's like wiki Cauldron feet.
What is wiki feet?
Oh, Lexi. There's something on the internet called wiki feet, where it is pictures of celebrities' feet for people to have an experience with.
I'm really glad I did not just Google that.
You're welcome for saving you from that traumatic experience.
All right.
You mean there's no smooth transition from wiki feet to back to a temple being sacked?
We will learn later that Sangrava is raided in about a month and a half-ish, and that is another one of the temples where the king got a cauldron foot.
It's so funny, I know. Sorry. The Sangrava temple. Stop laughing. It's feet. The iron foot. I can't not see it. It's like a hobbit foot.
Oh, that's exactly what I mean. I know that's not what it actually is, everyone. Like, we know that it's like what the cauldron feet are actually supposed to look like.
In Sangrava, this is where our dear sweet Gwyn was, and this is where her horrific story unfortunately begins, and we will learn much more about that in A Court of Silver Flames. But us as readers' first insight to this convo is more mentioning, quote, Asriel would want to know that. Know what? Because this is before she mentions that the temple is being sacked. So this really bothers me. Do you have any idea?
I think it's a representation of Rhys just being in his element as High Lord. Like, we really haven't seen him as the High Lord of the Night Court, beyond Under the Mountain. And this is him literally talking to his crew.
I think you're right. I think it's not like some super sneaky secret or anything like that. It does just bother me that like they were talking about something and we just don't know what it is. I want to know things. But this conversation and Feyre being in the room is Rhys showing her, knowingly or unknowingly, I'm leaning towards knowingly, that she belongs in the room where it happens. She belongs in the room where things are being discussed. It is the complete antithesis to Tamlin always shutting doors in her face. This convo also with more, we get some mentions of some new names. We get a Cassian. We get an Asriel. And we hear about people called Illyrians.
Ooh, I'm so excited.
I'm so ready.
We have to go back to the spring court here really soon, and I just can't. I can't.
No. And even though this is just a taste, this is our world expanding as a reader and even getting to know about some more political unrest. There's your politics, Lexi. Even though we have no idea what they're talking about on a first read, it is such a fun Easter egg on a reread because you're like, oh, I know those names. I know those people.
It's also hard not to compare the way that Mor regretfully has to hide information and the way that Lucien does. She is so apologetic because she wants to be able to tell Feyre she is welcoming and she's heartfelt. But like Feyre notes, she is the enemy's bride. We can't overlook that. Now, how is this different from Lucien? It's like he can't be outwardly apologetic. If he sides too much with Feyre, he is going against Tamlin. Like, if he had done that, like, whole, like, super apologetic, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't tell you. Like, I don't feel like it would go over very well with Tamlin because that is Lucien essentially showing to Feyre that he is siding with her versus with Tamlin. Now, he does show like little glimpses of that, like, pity and grimaces and little things like that we do know that he is so sorry. I'm not saying that he doesn't have that apology, but it is not so outward like Mor is doing it here. Because he's scared of Tamlin, while Mor she's just being cautious.
Yeah.
And she's not scared of Rhys, especially, of course, not in the same way. Also, Feyre is not part of Mor and Rhys's inner circle yet. She is supposedly part of Tamlin and Lucien's, and yet she's never involved with them, even as much as she is right now with an enemy court.
As Mor leaves, Feyre asks, what's that vanishing all about and how does it work? There are very few times in this night court visit, and even less so in the next night court visit, where Feyre asks questions about things. Remember, this is something she pretty regularly did under the mountain. She showed her curiosity. It's not really prominent here, but this right here is a sign of that curiosity coming back. And we finally get a name for this vanishing, winnowing, which and more on this in Maasverse Madness today.
I positively love how the magic is explained with the cloth analogy. It makes these considerably difficult magical concepts so much easier for us mortals, and it feels like there's almost, I'll call it a scientific edge to the magic. I know that it's not explained in a scientific way, but I love it how they make it make sense in the world. And I think that, Fourth Wing, the Empyrean series, does a fantastic job with this as well. And I just love seeing more magic.
I think it's so interesting when authors use metaphors, and not necessarily in contemporary settings, but it's sometimes with more contemporary language or
relatable to us.
Relatable.
Like I said, mortals, yeah.
I mean, Rebecca Yarros mentioned in an interview, the interviewer was like, "You are the queen of metaphors and like explaining things," and she was like, "Thank you very much." And it's showing right here with SJM and explaining this as well. It has officially been a week though, and Fae-vorite is ready to head home, but as she's approaching Rhys, she notices how he looks disheveled. This is the next morning, by the way. His hair is rumpled. He's in the same clothes as yesterday. And she wonders if he just returned. My question is, was he hunting down Highburn soldiers? I doubt it because he doesn't know for sure it was them quite yet who attacked Césaire. Was he with Azriel doing a sweep of the attack to get the info? Was he moving any surviving priestesses to the library? Was it D, all of the above? I don't know. But whatever it was, we start to see here how much the unrest in his court, it really affects him. Earlier, when Moore told him about the attack, the only reply was a cold and deadly who.
I love how it wasn't even a question. It was a statement.
Yeah.
Who.
Despite his I don't give a fuck cruel attitude that he shows the rest of the world, this insight is for us readers to really know how much he deeply cares, as opposed to some of the other High Lords that we know in this book, cough, cough, who damn their entire courts to under the mountain.
Can we also appreciate Rhys for sticking up for himself here too?
Yes.
He says, I want you to talk to me like a person. He's not trying to be manipulative or condescending. He's calling Feyre out on being a bitch.
Yes.
Which she is. Yes, he deserved that attitude under the mountain most of the time. But now he really is putting in the effort, and he has been more vulnerable with her than most. And she's giving him practically nothing back. And again, I understand why she is giving him nothing back. I'm not faulting her for that. But I do really appreciate that he's like, excuse me, I am a person. Treat me like one.
Same.
Side note, do you think that Feyre calls him Rhysand because of all the Rhysand sentences that she's been having to write all week? Because she has been going mostly leaning towards Rhys, and now she calls him Rhysand, and he's like, oh, I didn't know we were like, so formal. And he's like, really? You're going to call me that? Really? And I'm kind of with Feyre here because it's been the name on repeat for a week during her reading and writing lessons. So like, yeah, Rhys, she is going to call you that because that's what you've been calling yourself. Just saying.
I do think that she's calling him that to emphasize the like fuck you attitude.
Yes.
Like, how when in the dining room last book, when Lucian calls him Rhysand, he's like, Rhysand? Like, no one's calling me Rhysand in so long. I do think it's here to emphasize, like, again, that fuck you attitude. But I do love the idea.
Defining that he is still her enemy. Yep, exactly.
I do love the idea, though, that it's because of all the sentences she's been copying, and that's what her subconscious automatically calls him.
Real quickly, the dining room. You know that next episode, we are going to be spending a lot of time in the House of Wind dining room. How do you feel about that, Nicole?
It's a smaller dining room, but you bet I'm still going to be calling out the in the dining room. Absolutely. There's no way. It is a much more small, informal dining room. It's a happier dining room. I love a happier dining room.
Also, shouts to Moore, calling back our previous discussion about her respecting Feyre's privacy. And the concept, it's wild to Feyre. She says that she didn't see Moore all week, and Rhys is like, yeah, well, she was waiting for an invitation. And Feyre replies, well, no one told me. Yes, she did, Feyre. She told you to shout for her whenever you wanted company. And it's like she kind of forgot about that, or she didn't care. That's what it comes down to. She did not care, which I get it. Feyre is so far gone in her own darkness and loneliness that she can't care about the friendship that was offered to her. That's one of the best parts about this book, I think, is being on that healing journey with Feyre, seeing how she is right now, where she does not give two shits about the inner circle or them wanting to be friends with her, and then seeing that progress to where they're really and truly her family. As Cassian will do in Silver Flames, Rhys and Moore can only hold out their hands for Feyre to take right now. They can do all the other things, but not until Feyre takes that offering will she really let them into her heart.
Rhys winnows her back to the spring court, and I want to pause for a second because where are
and just go back to the night court?
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. Let's just scroll forward. All right, let's do this.
And I want to pause here because I'm very surprised that there's no one in the formal gardens, or at least guarding the estate. Later, when Rhys comes to get Feyre for month number 2, he just like winnows basically straight into the spring court. He's enemy number 1. Can we remember that? And he just winnows straight into this manor. And when Feyre asks, how did Rhys get in? Tamlin lies and says that he doesn't know, which is very sus, Tamlin. I'm assuming.
But wait, how does he lie? I thought he was telling the truth there.
No, because in that scene, Feyre's like, how did he get in? And Tamlin's like, I don't know. And Feyre mentions in her inner monologue, I could smell the lie beneath the words.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that Tamlin is short-staffed because maybe he sent all of his sentries to the human lands to get offed before Andris finally got offed and then started the events of this entire story. But we are seeing that vacancy right here to the point that literally enemy number 1 can just appear in the formal gardens without any consequences.
I hear you on that because I was wondering too, like, where are all the guards? But I think that it might speak, especially when he does winnow in just directly into the house, it speaks more to Rhys's power than to Tamlin's staffing issues. I was wondering maybe there's no guards around right now because Feyre isn't home. Like
true.
If she's not home, then there's no crazy need to protect. You're absolutely right, though. I thought it was really weird, too. And she just walks in and is like, I'm home.
Well, okay, so then...
a lot more depressed.
Oh, womp. Now, I do wonder, though, then for month 2, when Tamlin's like, I don't know how he got in. Do you think it's actually Tamlin unwilling to admit that Rhys is more powerful than his lord?
Yes. Yes.
I like that. That's canon. That's better. Okay, but anyway, when Feyre and Tamlin finally reunite and they're finally alone, Tamlin is looking over Feyre, even though she keeps saying, no one touched me, no one touched me. But quote, he kept scouring my face, my neck, and then he rotated me, examining my back as if he could discern through the clothes. This is such a Tamlin move. He's not trusting her word and instead doing his full check because he knows best. I can appreciate that he's concerned, but unsurprisingly, he's only confident that she's okay when he deems that she's safe.
Remember how relieved Feyre was to get home, how much she was looking forward to being reunited with Tamlin all week? And then within moments of her arrival, she's snapping at him. He's going into immediate protector mode, which causes her to create immediate distance from him, proving that at this point, she loves the idea of Tamlin, not actually Tamlin. She created this vision of him in her head while they were apart, and now he's here, and all of that is coming crashing down. And in fact, she's now defending Rhys, who she just spent all week assuming he was the monster, even up to the last day where she half wondered if he was going to do something extra terrible. That's just so heartbreaking. Like he caught her off guard for the week until the grand finale. But not anymore. Even if she won't show it to Rhys, he is beginning to earn her trust.
I'm needing my red flag again. Where's Dustin Pointer? Because as Feyre is looking around the room, she notices that the study is shredded. And she's like, you trashed the study? She's surprised, which I'm like, Feyre. And then Tamlin's like, I trashed half the house. Like, girl, I went more than that. Can someone please put this High Lord in High Lord anger management? I need him to get help. This is ridiculous. Feyre, again, though, starts making excuses for him. And listen, they are valid points for explaining how someone who would be sad, hell, even angry about the situation that Feyre was just in. He's wondering what it would have been like for him to imagine her in his enemy's hands, especially after what was done to her under the mountain. We do need to remember, I'm going to cut Tamlin a little bit of slack here. We do need to remember that Tamlin's scope of info here is this dude trapped my girl in a bargain. He dressed her in barely clothes. He drugged her and made her his drunken plaything for the better part of 3 months. And then when he was in the closet with her, he assaulted her. That was from Tamlin's point of view.
We also cannot forget that Rhys's family murdered Tamlin's family and worked for Amarantha for 49 years. And everyone has thought for centuries that the Night Court is only the court of nightmares. Like, again, we cannot overlook all of these things.
Well, and that's why we love these stories. It is very morally great characters, and it is fair for Tamlin to be terrified for Feyre. However, trashing the house is not the way to deal with those fears, Tamlin. We're going to go way more into Tamlin's anger and how he deals with it shortly, unfortunately. But I would be remiss if I didn't point out that in a week, this 500-plus-year-old man-child trashed half of his manor. I'm getting riled up again. Take me back to this fucking night court. I'm so pissed. Okay, I do have a question for you, Lexi, though. Is Tamlin grilling Fae-vorite about the night court reasonable or rude?
The sentiment behind it is actually proactive and strategic, which is a good thing, especially for Tamlin, who has lacked those qualities in the past. Tamlin is right to assume Rhys is hiding something in the night court. In fact, he even says that memories are scrambled of anybody who does leave the night court when there are very few who do. I have to wonder if that's a consequence of going to Velaris and their memories are actually getting fuzzy because they can't remember where they were?
Yes.
Maybe, yeah, like that. Love that little nugget there. The main issue I have with Tamlin's approach that makes this rude is, once again, he is removing choice from Fae-vorite. She says later. And I think she really does mean it. Like, she's not just trying to push it off. Like, she actually means like, yes, I'll tell you, but can we just do it later? Like, I'd like to be home and, settle in, unpack my bags for 2 seconds, But he refuses. And I guess I get his reasoning that it's fresh in her mind. But again, he is not listening to her wants. He is taking that choice away from her. And then he refuses to tell her anything that they're going to do with that vital information she gives them. He says it's, quote, neither here nor there. He's sidestepping any importance, any influence that Fae-vorite might be helping them with, which I'm trying to put myself in his shoes. I guess I get, because he doesn't want Rhys knowing, and he could easily break into her mind. Like, he very well might not be sharing all of this information with Fae-vorite because the High Lord of the Night Court, who can get into people's minds, has a direct connection to her. But ultimately, he did not listen to Fae-vorite again.
I agree with you entirely. She is someone who has direct insight to his number one enemy. And honestly, like you said, this is smart warfare leadership for once from Tamlin. Like, shocking. But the way that they are going about this is all wrong. Fae-vorite is mentioning how it feels like an interrogation because they are making it feel that way. They are basically holding a light in her face and being like, tell us what you know. Of course, we are in Fae-vorite's POV, and because we're in her head, it is supposed to feel like a violation and a disregard of Rhys's trust. Rhys spent a week trying to make Fae-vorite feel comfortable and safe, at least in Rhys's way. So naturally, this does feel like a betrayal because she's back in a house that she does not feel comfortable or safe in. So I guess the answer is yes. I guess the answer is both from both of us. Like, it is smart, but it is also rude because of how they're going about it. While we're in the night court, Fae-vorite started to enjoy the attire she had. And since the other option was to return in her wedding dress, she obviously...
Wait. Can we just picture that for 2 seconds? If she had returned in her wedding dress,
What a fuck you.
That would have been like, okay, Tamlin. And I bet you anything, they still would not have talked about it.
No, absolutely not. Like, he literally would have ignored her outfit. He would have just like stared at her face. Oh my God, that's terrible.
And then like her having to explain all of this in that stupid wedding dress. I'm sorry, it's not funny. It's funny, but it's not funny.
Okay, so that does bring us to the question though, because the wedding dress is still in the night court, we can assume. What do you think Rhys or maybe Nuala and Caradwyn did with the wedding dress?
I think the right answer would be misting it, but I like to think there was, as my in-laws call it, a spiritual fire where Cassian and Azriel burned it and like threw daggers into it. Like think of the Illyrian version of the printer getting destroyed in Office Space. That is what I imagine here with the wedding dress.
See, I'm almost picturing like a Viking funeral where they like pull it off into the city.
Oh, that's too respectful.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. But Fae-vorite is not in her wedding dress. She is in some night court attire and she's starting to really like it. She likes how comfortable and practical it is. But Tamlin and Lucien are making comments about how much they dislike these clothes. But the one time that Fae-vorite actually enjoys her clothes in this book so far, she is judged. This is not necessarily an L for the two boys, because they sincerely do not know that she enjoys them. She just came back from an enemy court. I think they think that she doesn't like them and she doesn't like being in them. But it is just one more brilliant way from SJM for that show don't tell for how much Fae-vorite is being judged when she makes choices for herself.
And how the night court clothes felt comfortable for her. Like she could be herself in them, while the spring court judges her and says that's all wrong. It's essentially saying who she wants to be here is wrong.
Ugh. I have a short and sweet claw watch for this scene because when Tamlin is telling Feyre about how they need to know these things or, quote, or can you not remember? And that's when the claws are being poked out. Tamlin automatically thinks the worst in Rhys. With their relationship, everything we said earlier, it's fair. It's a fair statement from Tamlin. But right here, he just has to think about Rhys doing something to Feyre and his claws are already readying for violence. I cannot imagine the claw watch that would have happened. And like, can you imagine the claw watch for him trashing the house after Feyre leaves the Spring Court for good?
I don't know if I'd call that so much a claw watch as like a claw Lord of the Rings trilogy marathon. Because you get it, it's a really long and intense watch, and it's just like goes on and on and on and on.
Like the extended director's cut.
The extended directed version, yes.
Like cut with just I'm just Ken over and over again interspersed between each movie. Oh my God, that's so good.
I obviously don't think that he muddled her mind at all, but it is interesting how Feyre feels like going through the week was like bathing in mud and oil. It's like the mating bond was at play. She innately knows at her core she can trust Rhys and she's betraying his trust, but she's pushing past it and convincing herself otherwise right now. That he is her enemy like he's Tamlin's enemy, but her heart, it knows better, making this info dump feel all wrong.
Feyre asks Tamlin and Lucien about her powers, and here's where our boys are going to get some big old L's. Immediately, Lucien brings up how her powers would be an affront to the other High Lords, even going as far to say that his father wouldn't like, quote, Tamlin's bride now having his powers. Not Feyre. Not Feyre having his powers. Tamlin's bride. She is not even her own person. She is Tamlin's property. And how she, a woman, might offend a group of power-hungry men.
Oh, there's so much I want to say here, but we're staying in the fantasy world.
I'm going to step on a little bit of a high horse. The male-female power dynamic is never outly stated, but it is heavily alluded to on the pages, especially with the High Lady conversation last episode with Tamlin. There is a reason that SJM writes stories about women rising to power among the men, and how in each story there is a group of men/males who try to pull sexist bullshit and try to bring down the FMC or the FMC plus co, and basically say that they're beneath them. Do I think that Lucien and Tamlin are consciously doing that here? Maybe, maybe not. But it is not an excuse because they are doing it here regardless, and the subtext is pretty stark. It's the we know better than you. Even Tamlin mentions how she doesn't need to train because he can protect her, needing to be that macho man protecting the damsel in distress. These are common themes in all of SJM books, and honestly fantasy in general, especially fantasy written by women. While SJM's books are not solely for women, one of the reasons I love, and I do believe many people love SJM so much, is because of how much she highlights women in power, and then also men who stand by their side to rise them up even higher. As a result, the message this sends to women, and definitely, it's not solely to women, but definitely highlighting women who have ever felt shoved down by those of the opposite sex. This is the message of you have a voice, you have power, and there are those who can stand by your side and lift you up. Find those people to be in your corner.
I love how Feyre keeps her little secret about shielding. She knows better than to tell these two about it, and that's one little thing she does have control over. She's literally training in secret, as small of a skill as she's training for, but she is training in secret. When Feyre thinks about how Tamlin couldn't stop Amarantha from killing her, she can't even finish the sentence of making excuses for him, which is not the first time that's happened in the stretch of chapters, before she inwardly thinks, screw it, I need to take action, because Feyre knows Tamlin won't. She can't trust him to protect her because he wasn't there to protect her when she needed it most.
In the same conversation, Tamlin mentions how Feyre has no training in weaponry. Has he completely forgotten how the hell she ended up in his manor 9 months ago? She fought and killed multiple Naga, not to mention Andrus. She also trapped a fucking worm. What is he talking about? I will give Lucien I'll give him a lowercase L, while Tamlin gets a capital L. Lucien gets a lowercase L, though, because he does mention the idea of her training in secret, which is completely shut down by, honestly, double L, lusty loser Tamlin.
Yeah. Oh,
this is bad.
And Tamlin just keeps his head buried in the sand. He knows there are looming issues with the King of Hybern, but he's outright refusing to believe that there will be a war, or at least he's refusing to acknowledge it to Feyre. Like Feyre says, that's wishful thinking. Yeah, it is, and that's Tamlin's MO.
Last thing I'm going to say on this scene is that as she leaves Tamlin's office, she thinks perhaps Rhysand did alter her mind. She is so unsure of who to trust and feels so little autonomy over her own mind that when she comes in and is literally being told what to believe in left and right back in the Spring Court, when she's with Rhys, yes, he's feeding her info, but he's also asking her, like we mentioned earlier, what do you think? And he's challenging her to form her own opinions on the matter. She's not back in the Spring Court for even an hour, and she's already doubting the sincerity of what Rhysand has told her / his actions.
It's such a heart-wrenching thing for her to go through as she tries to untangle who's her enemy, who can she trust, who truly has her best interest at heart. Of course, yes, the Spring Court does. Yes, like in their perspective, they do. They really do. But when it comes to anything specifically regarding her wants, her needs, her feelings, the Spring Court doesn't listen because they know what's best for her. She even thinks, quote, I could bow to him on this one thing. One thing? Feyre, darling, your entire life and everything in it is bowing down to him. Like, I read that and it just hurts so badly because that is how she is thinking when we as the readers are just like, no, come on, girl. All right, who's ready for the tithe? At least this episode's timing. Well, I was going to say this episode's timing is after our own taxes, but apparently not for Nicole. Feyre's been back in the Spring Court for a week when we can see the negative impact being here has had on her well-being. While she would still have nightmares in the Night Court, she kept her food down and as a result gained some weight back. But she's back to hurling her guts up every night alone once again. She's got sentries guarding her at all times. No one is telling her anything about what's going on by the borders or even exactly what is expected of her for the tithe. After all, Tamlin is taking care of it all. You don't have to worry about a single thing, Feyre. Tamlin is back only for the tithe, seemingly not to be with Feyre, and she's trying not to be offended, trying to excuse his actions, or rather inaction with her, because, hey, he has a lot on his shoulders, everybody.
Just one more way, it's the polar opposite of Rhysand. Rhys has many High Lord duties that, he could be involved with, but he chooses to spend his week with Feyre.
He was gone for most of it, but it wasn't necessarily in a I'm not available to you. It's more of a I'm giving you space, and he also kind of made it clear that he is available if she needs him.
Exactly. Whereas Tamlin here has been away on High Lord business left and right, and when he comes back, it's only for more High Lord business. It is clearly showing that he's not making Feyre a priority. Now, here's what I will say. If my partner was negating his job, and I know that's not what Rhys is doing, but if my partner was negating his job to solely spend time with me, I would be like, what are you doing? Please stop that. But I get that this is a romance and my practical brain can just get over it.
Practically, Tamlin's not doing a bad thing here, but
also it's the priority. It's the show don't
priority.
Tell. The priority.
Exactly. I'm not even going to speculate where all these Spring Court towns are that all these emissaries are coming from, since we are all in agreement. We don't know enough and wish we knew more, but we're not going to dwell on that because we already have plenty. What do you think about Lucien calling it a receiving room versus a throne room, Nicole? Because especially knowing that we do get another throne scene later in this book, was this a smart move by the Spring Court to call it something else, or is it them just sweeping more under the rug and pretending things are fine?
I too literally refuse to call this a throne room scene because that is for sexual acts only. But spice and throne room scenes aside, I do think it's smart, and it's also sweeping things under the rug. Putting Feyre to the side for just a second, all of these people coming to the tithe, as far as we know it, were highly affected by Amarantha, and maybe they weren't in the court part of the Under the Mountain, but I'm sure they equated Amarantha with a throne room regardless. That display of power is really what I'm getting at here. If Tamlin were to sit in a throne room, they might A, be triggered by their own Under the Mountain trauma, or B, associate Tamlin with Amarantha, which I'm sure the Spring Court does not want. So while yes, this is kind of like brushing it under the rug, I would argue that forcing normalcy, i.e. like doing the tithe, is more brushing under the 50-year trauma that they had under the rug that the Spring Court all experienced collectively, and that calling this the receiving room is more of a way to soften the parallel.
Before we get into the tithe, let's quickly recap what it is. First of all, in the real world, a tithe is a 1/10 part of something paid as a contribution to a religious organization or a compulsory tax to the government. In the ACOTAR world, the tithe is a long time tradition that happens twice a year and occurs in at least the Spring Court. We know it definitely doesn't happen in the Night Court, but cannot speak to the other courts. All of the court's population is required to give a gift to the High Lord, and the monetary equivalent is dependent on their income and status. In exchange, the High Lord protects them and helps them when he can. These gifts fund the High Lord's estate and pays for sentries, food, servants, and such. If a fairy is unable to pay their required amount, they are given a grace period of 3 days to gather the necessary funds. If they still do not have the funds, they must pay double next tithe. There is some inconsistency whether it's next month's or next tithe, because the next tithe is technically 6 months later, so it's one of the two. However, if they still cannot catch up with their owed payment, the High Lord is expected to hunt them down and impose judgment. Pretty sure that's a nice way of saying Tamlin kills them. Tamlin paused the tithe for the last 49 years because of Amarantha's reign, which, hey, we need to give him some credit for that. Good job, Tamlin. That was the right thing to do. And he's given them some extra time since they were all freed by Amarantha to get their affairs in order. But may I just say, it didn't look like the Spring Court Manor was hurting for cash by not having almost 100 tithes over the last 49 years. There was no shortage of food or servants or clothes or paint or anything else, at least from Thera's perspective, throughout her entire stay during Book 1.
You've got points right here. I mean, this is just absolutely. There is, in fact, an abundance of food on the table, so much that Fae-vorite was angry about what they were wasting.
Yes.
This is
so
wild.
I don't feel like they don't need this monetarily to fund Tamlin's estate. Maybe, yeah, if they didn't have it for, a few more years or a few more centuries or whatever, then yeah, it could hurt them. But as far as this happening so soon after Amarantha's reign, it is literally the principle of the matter. It is part of the tradition. I think that's part of the point, though, that Thera focuses and calls Tamlin out on after the events of the tithe. The High Lord doesn't need every single fairy's contribution or this biannual tithe to live a life of luxury. It is important in more of a symbolic nature to show who's boss and uphold order in the court. We also do have to look at this from Tamlin's perspective with a level head. He was not raised as the heir to the Spring Court High Lordship. He did not want or expect this responsibility. He both abhors his father and his father's beliefs and holds on to traditions because he doesn't know any other way. Tamlin is ultimately a passive leader. He certainly has progressive beliefs. Though he is not a dreamer, he is not proactive, he is not a doer of those progressive beliefs. He wants peace and stability, and in his opinion, that means falling back on tried and true traditions and ways of life. The tithe is a perfect example. He is not innately a malicious person who wants to be a hard-ass leader, but hey, that's the way it is. It's what his father did before him, and his father before Tamlin's father, and how Tamlin expects his son to do things too. Because tradition!
Proud of you for knowing that reference. Wow.
Of course. I know that very well. Well, first of all, that is one of my favorite musicals. And yes.
I did not know this.
And you were the youngest daughter your freshman year of high school. And I saw that play, of course.
I love you. You have such a good memory. Wow.
Of course I remember that. I couldn't remember many of the other characters that you played,
okay.
but I do remember that one.
I know there's one that you do remember because I was changing on stage and you catcalled me in the audience.
You were changing clothes on a stage. Of course I was going to catcall. Dead smacks me.
This is interesting because I just want to pull out the parallel, or the anti-parallel, I'll say, between him and Rhys. Rhys and Tamlin both disagreed massively with their respective fathers and how they ruled. But Tamlin uses it as an excuse for the way that things are and how he can't change them, while Rhys decided to rule in the opposite manner. Rhys has a dream for a different type of court. And like you said, Tamlin really never dreamed or had a goal of any other way of ruling. Quick side note here, as he's telling Feyre that this is how things are and this is how things shall be, he says, quote, "That's the way my father did it and his father, and the way my son shall do it. My son, not our son, not our child, where they rule regardless of sex. Nope, my son." Bad, Tamlin. Bad. I'm so glad that she'll go off and have a son with Daddy Rhys.
Daddy Rhys. Oh my God. That's really all I want for ACOTAR 6. I just want Daddy Rhys. Just give me all the Daddy Rhys.
I didn't mean to just be licking my teeth suggestively into the camera.
Not that way.
Yes, that way. In Tamlin's defense here, he does have a point where if he gives one person an exception, others would start asking for it too. And yes, I agree. Yes, they probably would start, asking, or they'd realize like we can challenge the High Lord in some ways. But I love Feyre's retort because it immediately shuts down this stupid line of thinking. It's to help the water wraiths replenish the lake or figure out why the fish aren't showing up there anymore. It's AKA be a fucking leader, dude.
Exactly. I can absolutely appreciate that Tamlin is in a tough position if he makes any exceptions. And I feel like there is a level of compromise that could be achieved here. Help them how you can with replenishing their home of the goods that they need to survive, and then ask for the tithe plus interest. I'm not saying there's a perfect solution or that I'm the one who has it, but it's the fact that Tamlin doesn't even think that way. It's only about the way things are, about keeping order and being loyal to arbitrary rules made by past generations, making him unable to imagine a different and better future where he can proactively help his people when they need it most. And this is not an isolated event. Time and time again, Tamlin has proved to be this kind of leader for his people. I'll reiterate, he doesn't know better, but there are only so many centuries where that serves as a good enough excuse, Tam, before we recognize that this is your character versus just a mistake. This whole scene with the water wraith is to illustrate how different Tamlin and Feyre really are. Feyre lived in poverty for years and would go on the brink of starvation. She knew better than to expect any kind of handout from the wealthy, and it did not sit well with her that their family's wealthy friends turned their backs on the Archerons when they needed help the most. She never could have imagined she would now be in the completely opposite position. She is now the wealthy one, and she's requiring resources from the poor, and she's not allowed to help them. Meanwhile, Tamlin is having to be the High Lord and be strict on these expected payments because, hey, that's part of life in the Spring Court. There are expectations of the citizens, and if they can't meet them, even with a few opportunities to catch up, then that's on them. Feyre undermines his authority and ruffles the order of things, which is indeed not cool of her, I will say. But she's driven by her emotions, by her personal experiences. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about this part, because you really can understand both perspectives. And I'll even go so far to say there's no clear right or wrong answer. It's entirely dependent on your perspective. But we get Feyre's perspective and feel her empathy and emotions through the page. She was formerly poverty-stricken and starving, versus Tamlin, who is a leader and needs to uphold order in his court. Tamlin is only focused on following the rules. Holy shit, he's pulling a Dane here. Feyre doesn't even feel right about this wealth from the Spring Court because it seems to all be from the poor. Here, the poor make the rich richer, while in contrast, the Night Court has some taxes, but nothing like the tithe. And it's more like the Night Court High Lord, I guess I'll say independently, is wealthy, and his riches are not from the poor.
It almost felt like it was being poured back into Valaris. It was like, it's the taxes that like repave the streets. Like it almost kind of felt like that. Yeah.
Yes. Speaking of differences between the Spring Court and the Night Court, I want to pull out a line. Tamlin is not budging with this water wraith's plea, and Feyre looks away from him, unable to stomach that merciless face. Rhys will have a merciless face and do some pretty bad things, specifically in this book with his Court of Nightmares. But Feyre will basically bask in it. She'll get literally wet from it, and she'll understand this mask of his and why he is the way he is.
So jarring to hear from you. Wow.
It's true. We have to ask ourselves, what's the difference between Tamlin being merciless with his court and Rhys being merciless with his court? The difference is who the High Lord's victim is. Yeah. Tamlin is preying on the innocent and the helpless, while Rhys is taking down the bad guys.
So then that does bring us to the question, which is, do you think that Feyre was in the right / do you think what she did was smart? I want to ignore the karma that comes from it later on.
I think asking if she did the right thing and asking if she did the smart thing are two different questions.
Fair.
Yes, she did the right thing. Objectively, the poor are required to give the wealthy what little they have and to protect them. But if they have nothing, literally are starving with nothing to give the wealthy, they are hunted by that same leader who is supposed to protect them.
Well, and let's not forget that he was supposed to protect them, and who burned down their villages, who took them under a mountain. Like, the protection is not a 100% coverage. It's a 90%.
Now, I will say in ACOTAR 1, he does go out pretty frequently to hunt down these beasts and things like that. And so he is protecting, but to that same degree, he knows that he's not the ultimate protector because he doesn't have all of his powers. Taxes are understandable. We all might hate them, but we understand them and we understand why we need to pay them. But taking from your people, some of whom clearly have nothing, is a reflection on you and your priorities. As Alice will say, too many fairies have tasted hunger these past 50 years, which means that word of this will spread. I'm not saying that Tamlin can cure world hunger. However, this goes right back to him being uncaring about the help his people truly need. Sure, he gave them extra time with the tithe, yet the tithe represents order and hierarchy. Some of his people don't have food, so maybe focus on that instead. Feyre may have done the uncomfortable thing. She may have done the thing that creates consequences for the court's image and for Tamlin's sense of order, but at least she did something. The alternative is letting these wraiths die because they have nothing for themselves and nothing for Tamlin. Feyre is sticking up for the little guy when it wouldn't have even crossed anyone else's mind. And in fact, even the people in the Night Court, Amren even says that like nobody would have done that. And that is what I love about her human heart. She may be Fae now, but she was a human once who understands starvation and having nothing, and she never wants anyone else to feel that way. Now that she is in a position of privilege, Feyre is naturally a compassionate leader, but Tamlin and co don't see it that way. Once again, they're seeing her as a liability instead of an asset. And the way that she went about this was, definitely a liability with how the tithe works. She was not professional in how she went about this because it did make everyone else go, what the fuck? Wait a second. But it's the empathy that drove her to do this. And that, in my opinion, is never wrong, especially given what she herself has gone through.
Many of the Spring Court residents are small business owners. And while they might not have modern technology like we do, for us in the real world who are business owners, a website is essential. Can you imagine what a Spring Court small business website would be? It would be a lot of flowers, a lot of floral and
so many flowers.
But that is why we are thrilled that this podcast is brought to you by Squarespace.
Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place, all on your terms. In fact, we are in the process of moving our own website, the Fantasy Fangirls website, over to Squarespace, and it's honestly been so much fun creating it. It is so easy. Nicole and I are both able to go in there and edit. Like, it's perfect, and I haven't messed anything up yet.
Honestly, me neither, and that's impressive for the two of us, and that just shows how easy it is. And to that point, building a website can feel really daunting, but with Squarespace Blueprint, you can start a completely personalized website and choose from a professionally curated layout and styling options to build a unique online presence from the ground up. That is actually what we did. You can easily launch your website and get discovered fast with integrated optimized SEO tools so that you can show up more often to more people and grow the way you want.
And we know that we have a ton of amazing artists in our community. So if you're trying to sell your art, Squarespace makes checkout seamless for your customers with simple but powerful payment tools. Accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, and in eligible countries, offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay.
Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/FFG to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much, Squarespace, for sponsoring this episode. Oh, Lexi, do you want to know where we are?
Are we in the dining room again?
We're in the dining room. First off, this scene is so heavy and it's about to get even heavier. But I do want to take a moment and just cackle at Lucian's gaze. It's bouncing from Feyre to Tamlin to his plate. I can only imagine what he is thinking. Like, maybe they're not made for each other. Honestly, he's probably worried about Tamlin having an anger outburst, which is rough. But as Tamlin is giving Feyre the side eye, she basically is like, out with it, boy. And he says, you gave the water wraith your jewelry. Jewelry I gave you. Yes, that I is in italics. And this is just, oh God, sigh. It shows how little he knows Feyre. She mentions during this book how little she cares about gifts like this. She was in poverty for years, whereas Tamlin has been living in riches for years, literally centuries. Her priorities are very different, and he is shocked that she would give up a gift from him to help someone. He's honestly making it about him even more so with the emphasis on the word I. Tamlin mentions how Feyre's undermining, this is just sweet shit right here. Quote, it makes the entire court look weak. First of all, that's a Freudian slip right there with his it makes the court look weak. Oops. But this is Tamlin's biggest fear coming right on the page. It's why he does not talk about his emotions. It's why he feels the need to protect and be this big macho man. It's this fear of him looking weak. To be fair, he just spent 50 years feeling weak as all get out from the whole Amarantha situation. But this is also now showing up as his biggest weakness as a leader, consistently protecting the public eye from viewing him this way, viewing him as weak, means that he's never seeing the full picture, let alone having empathy for his people in this way that we have here.
And then Nicole, I caught a claw watch.
I'm so proud of you.
And it is right after Feyre sticks up for herself and bares her teeth, telling Tamlin, don't you talk to me like that. Oh dear. And that is when we get a claw watch.
Is this one of our first claw watches where she stands up for herself? Especially since they've been in a relationship and his claws come out? I think so. Because normally it's at other people or it's at their situation. It's rarely
or trying to protect her. Yeah. I can't say for certain. I'm sure it happened once or twice in ACOTAR, but I do think that, yes.
I think it's one of their
especially
first,
with her sticking up for herself.
Yeah, well, and I think it's one of their first as a couple, where they are in a relationship, and it just perfectly sets us up for unfortunately for the next scene. When Lucien starts to speak up as mediator, Tamlin snarls at him. Did I ask for your opinion? What? Lucien was very vocal last book, even defying and challenging Tamlin pretty frequently. But now he's lowering his head at Tamlin's words. Here's my questions. Is it because Tamlin now has his powers back and he doesn't need other people's opinions because he's all knowing? Is it because he's on the brink of an outburst and Lucien has begun to fear him? What changed in their dynamic where Lucien can't speak up for himself anymore?
I don't think it's one answer, but another big change from before to now is Tamlin's feelings for Feyre.
That's true.
Lucien is seeing this relationship dynamic, and as much as he sides with Tamlin, he knows it's wrong, and he pities Feyre, trying to help her in what little way he can. And Tamlin doesn't like his friend trying to undermine him in his macho man relationship. He is blind to the possibility that he is not absolutely right in this driving need for control. Control of Feyre, of his court, and the people he leads, which absolutely does include Lucien.
Feyre is pissed though because Lucien's hanging his head down low. And so she silently tells him to fight back, fight back. Note that those words, fight back, stand up for yourself, challenge him, those are in italics. And even after she stops speaking these italics words to him, his jaw tightens. I do wonder if this is her silently conveying that, message to Lucien with fervor in her own mind, or if she's using her Daimati powers unknowingly and speaking into his head. If she was, I would assume it would be in a way similar to how she uses her powers with Tarquin. It's speaking in the owner's own voice or else it would be, Lucien would be like, why the fuck is Feyre in my head? What's going on?
Yeah.
So given the fact that the italics normally mean we're speaking mind to mind, I had to ask.
I think because he doesn't do anything about it, I think that it's more of just Feyre talking to herself, trying to talk to him. And that's when then she kind of slips in after while she accidentally is trying to communicate with him, and then boom, she's in his head.
I do agree. I do think that if it was her actually speaking in his head, in his own voice, first of all, I do think that's something that SJM would have told us at least later on. Secondly, it would have diminished the powerful moment of what we're about to experience right here, because we're not done talking about Feyre's Daimati powers. I love the explanation of how this power feels / appears for Feyre. She is looking through her own eyes, and it's almost like the room is split. Literally how our screens are right now, where it's split half looking through her own eyes and half looking through another person's vantage point. This would, first of all, be so freaking trippy. I would get such a headache pretty quickly. I do wish we got to see this magic at play more. I get morals or whatever and not wanting to infiltrate people's minds, whatever. But it would be really cool to see this at play more.
The sad thing is this only happens so many times in the series, and it seems like half of the incidents where it happens is with Lucien. Yes. Don't quote me on that number, but poor Lucien, he's just always getting the short end of the stick.
Well, Lucien's mind, we need to talk about that, because Lucien, who seems, at least last book, he's so happy-go-lucky. He laughed, he joked, he poked fun at his friends like Tamlin. End quote. Thoughts slammed into me, images and memories, a pattern of thinking and feeling that was old and cleverer and sad, so endlessly sad and guilt-ridden, hopeless. wow, this is really surprising. It shows just how much Lucien is, I'll call it putting on a show. Maybe not like, da-da-dun-dun-da. Like he's pushing down a lot of his feelings. But that last word, hopeless, is so sad for Lucien. Is it hopeless at his situation in the spring court? Hopeless that he doesn't see another way to make Tamlin change? Hopeless because his one love, someone who he at least had a thought that was his possible mate, was killed? I guess that's more of like the guilt-ridden, like maybe survivor's guilt.
I think it's all of it. Lucien has led such a sad life, and we've known that. We've always known that. And he is centuries old, and I love how she can feel centuries of emotional baggage. Too often in fantasy, our main POV character is young, like in her early 20s, and I love getting these immortal characters' perspectives and how their narration shifts because of how many more decades of experience and emotions they have.
I just want to say, soon, Lucien, you're going to have your band of misfits. You'll have Vassa and Jurian, and Eris will kind of like come in and out of the cabin, at least, where they're all hanging out on the continent. But I really need some more insight, actually, how that situation. I thought that's why I need Lucien to be a POV in ACOTAR 6, because I need to know how Vassa, Jurian, and Lucien all work together.
I really do hope we get more of that in ACOTAR 6. I want more on the content. I want more Daddy Reese. I want so many different book themes, and it's like, I know it's not all going to happen in one book, and I'm going to be totally fine with whatever we get. In this short scene in the dining room, Feyre exhibits two of her new powers: her Damani magic, which she received from Reese, of course, and her flames when she burns the table, which she received from Baron. I love how she's worried they'll notice the burns, and she's mortified that Lucien may have realized that she went into his mind. She cannot control these powers, but she's trying to push them down because, oh ho ho, she's supposed to pretend not to have these powers. Again, the stark difference between the spring court and the night court, where she's invited to train and test out those powers. But she's so nervous about these powers that afterward in her room, she's trying to convince herself that the burn marks, maybe they'd already been there, and maybe she didn't just slip into Lucien's mind. And it's just like she's trying to convince herself otherwise because she doesn't want these powers. She doesn't want to own them because she really is scared of them.
She's literally gaslighting herself in her room later.
Yes.
Like it's, Feyre. Here we go. It's time to talk about the study. This was a hard scene to cover. Like, I just want to be very clear. This was a really tough scene.
Not just these two scenes, but the spring court in general, these few episodes are very tough to talk about and to cover.
A lot more fun.
Yeah.
After Tamlin doesn't come to bed, Feyre goes searching for him, and she finds him in the study. He apologizes for being angry and having his outburst earlier, and he tells Feyre that she had every right to challenge him. Which, pause. I want to believe that this is a small glimpse into what Tamlin could have been if he got off his I know best high horse. This also could be him, guilt-ridden. We're going to see him quite literally like that for the next stretch. And he is saying anything that would get him back into the green zone. But I want to believe the first one.
I want to believe it too. I do think all of that. And again, Tamlin does mean well. I am not making excuses for him, especially in this scene and in a few more scenes here too. And one of the reasons he is such a complex character is because he isn't innately bad. Like, we can't just call him the villain and be done with it like we can with other villains. JFB. He's not a malicious person. He really does try in his own way. It's just that, though. It's his own way. He's flawed, but wants to be good. His definition of good can be skewed, and especially his way about getting there. I will say, I find it interesting how he is able to connect with Feyre more when he finds a tie back to how she was as a human. Feyre made it clear that he doesn't know what it's like to be starving, and he acknowledges that and apologizes for how he acted because she's right. It's like he's connecting with the old Feyre, the human girl he saved.
Well, and on that exact note, about feeling connected to that old Feyre, he takes an apology one step further with a gift. As he's like, this gift is for you, she thinks that she's felt lighter than she has in days. And I'm not going to lie, this did kind of surprise me. My best guess is that it has more to do with the fact that he apologized and like, oh my gosh, the ever famous, maybe things will go back to normal now. And that's what's causing the feeling lighter than she has in days?
I took it more as like, it's because she so desperately needed to hear she was right. And I don't mean that in a smug way. I mean that as a person who has been told no constantly recently kind of way. And he says, for you, when all we've been hearing this book and Out of the Mountain was for Tamlin, for Tamlin, for Tamlin. She puts her own needs in a little box and sacrifices everything for Tamlin. So it's probably kind of nice to hear, hey, here's something for you. It's like this glimpse into how they used to be and how she feels like they should be, where they had a little bit of emotional connection and she felt loved, not protected, not cared for, but loved and heard.
The lightness only lasts a heartbeat, though, because she opens up a traveling painting kit. I've been hounding Tamlin for 2 episodes on Read the Room, buddy, and he kind of does here. He's noticing she's not jumping for joy at this very generous gift, and he attempts ish to talk about feelings. He says, quote, I thought that if you started painting again, ... I waited for him to finish. He didn't. What was the ending to that sentence, Tamlin? Was it, I thought if you started painting again, you'd start healing, or you could face your monsters?
You'd find joy in life again. You'd move on from your depression. No matter what, it's like he's realizing the actuality of Feyre's situation, that it's more complicated than just starting to paint again.
He was so close to being a supportive fiance and like talking about feelings, about like their deep trauma. He was so close, Tamlin. And then he just didn't finish his sentence.
Yep. Because he can't. They can't. She responds back about if the paperwork is helping him. So they're both doing this dance around the root of their personal issues, only willing to talk at the most surface level. Like we hammered last episode, though, she's following his lead until she's not here.
Well, here's where she doesn't, because showing that she is braver than Tamlin, full stop. She decides that now is the time, quote, for me, for us to have this conversation. Addressing how she can't do this anymore with having the guards around her, having the constant protection, she begs Tamlin to let her help. But he immediately says, quote, you've given enough. I wonder if the real reason here is, forcing this quiet life on her is because this is what he would have wanted. Remember, he didn't want to be High Lord. He loved playing the fiddle. So we can assume possibly that he wanted a simpler life than the one that he was dealt. So Feyre wanting to step in and rebuild and fight for the land, it doesn't register for him because it's her needs and he's forcing what he thinks she needs or what he would have wanted on her. Again, it just shows how he's not listening to her and instead believing that he knows best.
And this is moments after he said, we're not talking about me. We're talking about you. Talking about Feyre, but not listening to her. Not letting her truly express herself without him literally cutting her off with an I know better talk.
And finally, Feyre explodes. She says, then marry someone who can put up with this.
Yeah, girl. It was so refreshing to see this, like where she just snapped back, like she's really starting to push back with him here. And yes, I definitely do think that having spent a little bit of time in the Night Court and especially the conversations that she had with Rhys have influenced, but she would have gotten to this point anyway. It doesn't I don't know if it would have been a few weeks, a few months. Gosh, I can't even imagine what it been like in a few years, but she was going to snap at some point. And I'm just so glad that it happened. I'll say this quickly, as much as I wish there was never a need for it to happen in the first place, but she sticks up for herself and all of us readers are just cheering her on because gosh, she needs it.
I mean, this is the ultimatum. This is the ultimatum conversation right now because this snaps something in Tamlin, finally opening his eyes with just how dire, how ultimatum this situation is and the longevity of their relationship is at stake. The fact that he didn't even think that was a thing until this line right here is pretty telling.
You don't want to marry me anymore? It's like, shut the fuck up. I'm sorry.
No, it's about to get real up in here. This causes Feyre to finally open up about how she is deeply feeling. No more surface level bullshit. It is deeply feeling time. Saying how she's drowning with the hyper protectiveness and Tamlin might as well be the one pushing her head under the water. And then the study explodes. Before we get into this section, we have to address the cycle of abuse, which was created by psychologist Lenore Walker, who is the founder of the Domestic Violence Institute, to help partners, specifically female partners, identify when they are in an abusive relationship. The 4 cycles are tension, incident, reconciliation, and calm, all of which we see in the scene with Tamlin and have seen with Tamlin. It is not, unfortunately, solely the scene. Honestly, we can argue that the first 9 chapters of this book are really the tension stage, where she feels like he can explode at any moment, and Feyre feels like she's constantly walking on eggshells, not knowing what kind of Tamlin she's going to get in any given scene, which is why she's not really ever pressed him hard until this moment, because she's, fearful of his temper, and she blames herself instead. And when she finally decides to talk about how she is feeling, Tamlin makes the study a shell of a room, aka the incident stage. We've talked endlessly about Tamlin's emotions and shoving them down to the point that lashing out is a breath away at any given moment. And for the most part, this has looked like a claw watch. And in just this stretch of chapters, he's started lashing out more and more on his emissary and also his fiance. And then this happens, honestly leaving Feyre in complete shock at what just occurred.
She's now seen a side of him that she hasn't seen before. She always knew it was there. She had seen the aftermath of his rages with rooms torn apart. I mean, shit, look at what he did to Amarantha too. She has seen him in his, I'll say, beast mode, in his raw power. But this particularly is entirely new.
Feyre, acting on instinct, creates a barrier of a bubble of wind to protect her from Tamlin's outburst. It feels very fitting that she is using his power right now to protect herself from him. Although she does later ask Rhys where the wind is from, and he does say Daycourt, but in the locking her up scene, it is the same power that she uses in this scene, and it's stated that. So I don't know if that's just a oversight or whatever.
My understanding is that it's actually more of a all the courts sort of thing. That's just kind of like what it's never outright stated, but because we see several different High Lords with those powers, I'm assuming that most of them do have that kind of protection. And then Rhys does have I'll say a different kind of shield that he uses. So
I do want to hit on a side note here, because can we imagine what would have happened if Feyre did not act on instinct?
We do see that in ACOWAR, where she purposefully does not shield herself so that so that people can see the bruises, the cuts, and all of that kind of stuff.
I forgot about that. Fuck. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's at least in ACOWAR, she'll be having some fun.
Well, she'll be in her reputation era at that point.
Yeah, that'll be a little bit better.
It really does blow my mind that after Tamlin sees this occur, after seeing that she saved her life by using her powers, he is still unwilling to let her train to use them. I just want to call that out, because that is fucked. That's fucked up.
Yep. Because she's having to protect herself from him, and he can't even fathom that. Even in this moment, I feel like he cannot really fathom that.
I'll get into that. I'll get into that in a second. I'll get into that right now. Tamlin starts pounding on her wind air shield or whatever, begging for her to let him in.
The irony, considering what happens in a few chapters.
I did not fucking even put that together. Yep. Wow.
Yep.
When Feyre finally drops the shield, quote, "Then he stepped over that line between chaos and order, danger and safety." Woof, those last 2 words. This is the first time that Feyre feels in outright danger because of Tamlin, but she still lets him in anyway, which brings us to stage 3, reconciliation. Tamlin apologizes over and over again because he's saying that he's going to do better and that today was an exception. This is him attempting to make the situation okay so that he does not have to face the consequences of his choices.
Even saying he can't control it sometimes, and he's blaming it on being a bad day. He's asking her if they could just move on from the tithe and this fight and overall bad day and just forget about it.
He says, quote, "I couldn't save you before. I couldn't protect you from them." Ironic that she needs to protect herself from him right now, but that's whatever. "And when you said that about ... about me drowning you, am I any better than they were?" This feels like a manipulation on Tamlin's part to make her say, "No, honey, you're right, you're fine," which Feyre even goes on to feel like she should say that it's not true. Do I think that Tamlin is doing this manipulation consciously? No, but that's not an excuse here. She does, though, stay quiet rather than say, "No, honey, it's okay, whatever, it's fine," because she stands by what she said about Tamlin drowning her. She knows she's right to have shared that information.
And for once, she's not making excuses for him. In the next chapter, she will go on to pretend like everything is fine, and I'll call making some excuses for him. But right now, she is not making excuses for him. He's making plenty of excuses for himself, where he says, "Let me get through this, please." And she thinks to herself, get through what? She's wondering what it is that Tamlin is going through that is so much worse and so much more important than what she's going through. Why does he get to go through his shit when she's supposed to shut up and move on about hers? Again, Nicole and I are both in agreement that we don't think he's purposefully trying to manipulate her by having her tell him what he needs to hear. But he still is, because he is being so selfish and making excuses for why he did that, needing to hear it'll be okay. And it's like, Fae-vorite doesn't have the words left because she knows they won't be okay because there is no end in sight here. Like, again, she will go on to be like, well, things are kind of normal, but subconsciously she knows they're not going to be okay here. She's not going to be okay. And in this moment, she gives up on herself. She spoke up and look what happened. So now she has nothing left. No good emotions, no love for him in this moment. No anger, no sadness, just nothing. Nothing left to give, as she says. And it's just so heartbreaking how like she has no words, but she still knows that she needs to comfort him because again, they do have that deep connection. And she can only hold him because that is how they really communicate best, is with their bodies.
We talk so often as a fandom about the locking her in the house scene. Quite frankly, this feels like the last straw moment for Fae-vorite. I don't think it's consciously for Fae-vorite, but this is the moment of, we cannot get past this. Like, this is where she completely shuts down. What sucks is when I first read this, it was not the red flag that it is for me right now. And you and I are both deeply affected by this scene for our own personal reasons. I think it's one of the reasons why these first 12 chapters are very hard for us to do, but I do think it is so important for us to deep dive in this way. We've had many people reach out to us saying that they didn't realize the red flags and they didn't realize how bad, I'll call him bad. I don't really like to do black and white stuff like that, but at least here, bad Tamlin is until we started doing this deep dive. And I do think it is really important for us to call these out, as difficult as the situation is to analyze in the way that Lexi and I have. Side note though, did no one hear the room explode? Did no one in the house hear a massive explosion and run to see what it was? Or are they just so used to Tamlin destroying the house that they were like, it's a Tuesday? That's not
I will
funny.
say
That's
it is midnight. I know it's not funny. It's not funny. I will say it's at midnight, so most people are probably sleeping. But yeah, probably used to outbursts and know just not to get in his way. As Reese will say, does no one care about what's going on under that manor's roof?
No. Like the answer is no.
Because they're all scared. They're all scared of Tamlin. Yep.
I mean, we see that later. The servants are like keeping in their quarters. Like oh my God, it's wild. We get a short montage of Fae-vorite noticing how there's fewer guards around her at times because Tamlin finally gave her what she wanted. It literally took him feeling guilty about his outburst. I'm going to call it an outburst, for him to finally cave and give her an ounce of freedom.
Well, don't forget lots of worshiping her body and apologizing constantly too. Like, I get it. He feels terrible. He lost complete control and shattered everything around them. Again, it was not purposeful, but it was a culmination of who he is as a person.
And to close out our cycle, this is now the calm stage. Fae-vorite in the Night Court will mention how things are creeping back to normal. She'll make excuses for him, wishful thinking that things are going to be better, mentioning how Tamlin lightened on the guards and how he's trying. Because of him trying, she won't jeopardize that by helping Reese in the upcoming war. This is all a cycle, though, and it's just restarting with the tension stage when she gets back from Night Court round 2. During this montage, Fae-vorite is practicing her reading, writing, and shielding, and thank goodness, because it gives her something to do. It's her tether for something for herself.
Exactly. And hey, she's also glad that Tamlin isn't there to witness how she wakes up every night from her nightmares. It's like, yeah, things are going kind of back to normal, but she's still just going through the motions. I know we've said this a lot on the podcast and even in ACOTAR book 1, like our last few episodes of Under the Mountain, but this is truly the beginning of the end for their relationship because, like Nicole said, she's checked out now while he's gone. Once Tamlin returns, she'll say she makes a conscious effort to try because she owes it to both of them to try and interact with each other. This relationship can only be good and normal if they act like everything is fine, which, friends, that is not how long-lasting relationships work. Life is a roller coaster, and you need your partner during the ups and especially during the downs.
Thank God Reese is back for month 2. God. We need to shake this shit off.
Everybody, shake it off. Shake it off. Just for now. Maybe we'll do a whole dance party at the end of this episode.
I want a
beginning
shot
of the
at
next
the end of this
episode.
I want a shot at the end of this episode. This is ridiculous.
He throws such shade at Tamlin and his awareness, asking if they're running low on food here because, Feyre has lost all this weight that she had gained last month, and Tamlin doesn't have a single clue. He's ignorantly oblivious.
Shouts to Reese, though, with Tamlin inches away from his throat, he just picks some lint off of Tamlin's tunic, which I just quick dust watch. This is such a power move. I love this shit so much. Tamlin is unhinged, and he's putting himself, Reese, in this superior seat. Go, Reese.
Tamlin is convinced Reese is playing a game, and I have to say I don't blame him for thinking this way. Again, Reese was not innocent under the mountain and previously, but Feyre has the right of it, pushing Tamlin about the approaching war. And of course, it starts escalating to their usual conversation about Feyre having earned peace so she can be kept in the dark, that she's done enough, etc., etc. And she's just so tired. Feyre is always so tired these days, and especially now she's like, yep, I just don't have the fight in me. Again, she has nothing left to give. Nothing to give Tamlin in this moment, or even nothing to give to Reese. No fight. I will say this. As much as Feyre says that she hates the Night Court, she thinks to herself how going back to that, quote, open, serene place atop that mountain, it seemed better than hiding in the library. She's alone in both places, but in the Night Court, she is by herself, while in the Spring Court, she is lonely. Big difference.
Well, that's good. They get back to the Night Court, thank God. And Reese is pissed, rightfully. He knew that things were bad since all he hears is silence down the bond with the exception of a blast of terror. But seeing Feyre, how much weight she's lost, how much her spark and her fire have gone out, this would freak out any person, let alone a mate.
He's wanting to play with her. He's poking at her like he usually does so that he can get a rise out of her. Again, she has nothing, no fight in her. And that's more terrifying for Reese than anything else. He's so scared and so worried for his mate.
Which just points for Reese. Honestly, this entire trip, this entire episode, points down the line for Reese. There's
not much competition, I'll say that.
No.
When Reese asks Feyre if she's given his offer about aiding in the upcoming war any thought, she says no. And Feyre does have a point. Reese is saying she should be a weapon, not a pawn, but they seem the same to her, and it only depends on who's wielding it. This goes right back to our ongoing conversation about Feyre being a liability in the Spring Court and an asset in the Night Court. And she's just tired of being something for everyone else. Which, yeah, rightly so, she is very sensitive to the concept of controlling her. She already has it in the Spring Court. She doesn't want it in the Night Court as well and cause further issues. Reese is trying to help her tap into her own sense of self, her own powers, her own skills and abilities and aptitude. But there's no denying he has his own agenda too in working with Feyre, unrelated to her, being his mate and him being in love with her. Is that the driving factor in all of this? No, but it does still exist. He needs her help and wants her to want to help him. And he's trying to prove that he's worth helping, that she's capable of helping during these weeks in the Night Court together. He's being very vulnerable in this conversation, saying what he went through in those 50 years under the mountain. But again, we are right back at that enemies conversation, where whose enemy is all about perspective. Feyre doesn't want to jeopardize how things are going with Tamlin, so she's not going to risk thinking Reese is anything but her enemy because he's obviously Tamlin's enemy.
These two Night Court trips could not be more opposite from each other. The previous one, she was curious. She was asking questions. She was reluctantly bantering with Reese and rising for breakfast in the morning. Here, she's sleeping till noon. She's isolating herself and she's completely vacant. But there is also one more big stark difference, and that is Feyre's ability to shield and read has massively skyrocketed. She's a very good student. Feyre reads Rhys's sultry sentences perfectly and even reads an entire book in a week. I know it was because our girl had nothing better to do in the spring court, but I'm still so proud of her. On the book that she's reading, I love this. She mentions that she's just finishing up a particularly good chapter, and it's the second to last one in the book. This is so meta because the second to last chapter in this book, it's Rhysand's one and only point of view. We learned in this point of view the huge twist about him swearing her in as High Lady. And it's also a moment of Feyre stepping into power. It is so poetic considering how powerless she feels right now. I love that. We needed that. I need that tie-in right now.
I love that so much. I also felt like it was a little bit of a flex from SJM being like, yeah, I know my last 100 pages are nuts.
I feel like every second to last chapter of an SJM story is just a wild ride. This is such a flex. I love it.
Yes.
Finally, Rhys is like, what can I do to help you? What a concept for Feyre to be asked. She has not been asked this before.
No, and Rhys asks what we've been analyzing for way more hours than I ever thought we would. Does your High Lord simply not care? And here come the excuses once again for his behavior. Of course Tamlin cares. He cares too much. He cares too much for Feyre's safety, cares too much for appearances. But he doesn't care about Feyre herself and her well-being in a way that requires confrontation and facing the difficult conversations.
I love this. He says, quote, she wins. That bitch wins if you let yourself fall apart.
Once again, there's that stark difference between him and Tamlin. And I also love that he does not call her by her name in that moment, but he calls her a bitch.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
About Amarantha.
Amarantha,
yes.
not Feyre, obviously.
Yes.
And Feyre actually wonders if this is what he has been telling himself over the past few months. It's another moment to highlight just how similar these two are, not only in their trauma, but also how their healing journeys can be similar too. But Feyre's not quite there yet. She is not interested in hearing this right now. So Rhysand seals her book shut. This would also piss me off, by the way. Like, this would really anger me. And Feyre feels icy, glittering rage. I love this. Because yes, Rhysand is doing this to make her feel something, anything other than this hollow silence. She starts using her power and throws the ice book at his head. While I don't think it's described as her feeling powerful, it's her fighting with power. And that's a big step in the right direction for our girl. Unfortunately, the second week in the night court is very, very short. Soon, very soon.
Last time in the spring court. We can do this. We can do this. Nicole, there's no plant watch here. No crazy symbolism for the gnarled, mighty oak that Tamlin is in, because I looked it up. And you want to know what oak trees symbolize?
What?
Get this. Strength and sturdiness. And from the way their roots are, they also represent control within their environments and protectiveness of what nourishes them.
I feel so called out right now because in the tithe scene, she's sitting in an oak chair. And I looked up oak in that scene and I was like, it doesn't really feel relevant. You know what, Lexi? Good plant watch. That was an excellent plant watch. Good job.
You want to know something else?
What?
I made that all up.
Fuck you.
It is not relevant. I did look it up and it's like, oh, this is not relevant, but I already went through the effort, so I'm going to just put this in anyway.
So what does it actually mean?
I honestly don't remember what it actually was. It was not rememberable, but I remember it not being relevant whatsoever. And I was like, well, let's just mess with Nicole for 2 seconds.
That is probably the most big sister thing you've done on this podcast yet. I love that for you. That's so funny.
Back to the spring court.
Gone is the guilty Tamlin. Let's make things all right, Tamlin. And he's right back into protect, doubling down more than ever. This is beyond infuriating that it literally took Feyre leaving for a week for him to go right back into my way is the only way attitude.
He growls at Feyre to get inside. He's ordering her, like being mad at her for something that she does not have control over with being around Rhysand. I hate you so much, Tamlin. I can't wait to get rid of you for a long, long time and have you replaced with my sun and stars, Cassian.
It's going to be really interesting when we get to the end of this deep dive and how we feel about Tamlin, because there is the question of like, does Tamlin get a redemption arc? Do we want Tamlin to get a redemption arc? And if I had to be asked right now, I'd be like, no, fucking kill this guy. I
still think that he should have died, but I agree. This is definitely a very specifically in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feelings about Tamlin.
I do have a question for you, Lexi. It is mentioned that there is a nameless threat that has broken into the lands. Do you think that this is a real threat, that they're keeping the name from Fae-vorite to further protect her, protect? Or do you think that this is them making up some threat so that they can go research on how to break the bargain?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
My first reaction is it's a real threat because there is clearly something going on, as we've been discussing. But then I do pause because, yeah, this would make sense, especially since the fear of this bargain and the possible consequences, it's so extra fresh in their minds once Fae-vorite is back and Tamlin is in, protect mode. I could see it being either way. Yeah. We know that there are real threats, but they're also trying to go to the day court to fix this bargain. Yep.
Let's talk about someone taking some W's for a change in this episode. Other than Rhysand.
That's not Rhys.
It's time for a claw watch. Feyre's version. Feyre sees a flash of red hair and immediately thinks it's Amarantha. Her nails start growing into Tamlin's man-bear-pig claws, but Feyre tells them to stop. And they do, which is so fitting that she thinks she sees Amarantha and starts to turn into the exact beast that killed that bitch. However, what is also happening in this moment? Tamlin and Ianthe are shutting her out again. So this claw watch, in my eyes, does have a double meaning. I do think that obviously it is the Amaranthe on the forefront, but I also think it's because she is so angry at any given moment. Who does notice the claw watch, though? Not Tamlin, not Ianthe, shocking, but Lucien. Our boy Lucien notices and tells her that he's going to talk to Tamlin again tonight. I love that it's mentioned how he repeats himself on the, I'll talk to him tonight. I'll talk to him tonight. It's almost like he's having to talk himself up in order to stand up to Tamlin, which this is also a very important moment. It's so short in the Spring Court, and it's rarely one moment that you think of, but it is really important because this is where we start to see how much Lucien is actually actively caring for Fae-vorite. It is a moment where they do band together, and it's setting us up for this alliance that they will have next book, which I can't wait to get into. I'm so excited. In the scene where Lucien is attempting to change Tamlin and Ianthe's minds about training Fae-vorite, Ianthe brings up an interesting point, and that's the only time I'm ever going to say that sentence. She mentions how any children of Fae-vorite will have all of these powers, her 7 High Lords' powers, and if they let her train, a High Lord will see how much their offspring could gain, and they'll take her away and make her the baby mama. While this is wild paranoia, it does make me wonder, will Nyx have all of her powers too? And if so, are we about to get a Jack from the Incredible situation on our hands? Because I hope so.
Cauldron, help our inner circle with that. But really, I think the answer is no one knows. Yeah. This is completely new territory. They're all in, and anything is possible. And Ianthe is being extra dramatic and certain to manipulate Tamlin into thinking her way. She has her own ulterior agenda. She does not care about Fae's safety, but she does care about these High Lords turning their attention on her in new and targeted ways. I think she also wants Fae and Tamlin to have these powerful offspring that she, Ianthe, can gain control over, like Rhys has alluded. I bet she also doesn't want Fae to hone her powers because she's scared of how powerful Fae likely is and doesn't want that kind of competition or challenge. She's like, okay, we got to keep Fae weak and defenseless so then Ianthe can stay strong and unblocked in her mission.
Oh my God, that was brilliant. Horrible, but brilliant. I am going to give Lucien a huge W here for giving Ianthe and Tamlin the reason sandwich of the century. If she is going to be hunted by the High Lords for having their power, why not give her a chance to, stand up for herself?
Tamlin won't hear of it. There is personal growth and potential. It's overseen by Tamlin and nobody else.
Last thing I want to note on the scene before we get into the final scene of this episode, Fae getting locked in the Spring Court. She locks her bedroom that night. And this is a neon sign, show don't tell for us readers on how unsafe she feels. Remember in the night court, Lexi highlighted that she didn't bother locking her door because she thought Rhys would be able to get in and whatever. But Lexi made a great point that there's also probably this subconscious thing of I feel safe here. I don't need to lock my door. Not here, though. Here we go. Tamlin and Lucien are running out of the manor in a hurry the next day because there's activity on the western sea border, which, pause. This is the side that has Highburn on it. What's happening? Is a small group from Highburn attacking, I don't know, the continent pirates that are going around? I don't know, but I am judging, if it was Hybern's forces, I am judging Tamlin even more, if that's even possible this episode, for allying with him when he literally is having to run out in a hurry to go fight them.
I was wondering, like, maybe they're coming over to test the border protections.
Oh,
are they looking to examine where the weaknesses in the wall are, like, you know, the Lannister twins do in ACOWAR? But I do think it is Hybern related for sure, because Tamlin also says that he doesn't want their enemies getting a hold of Feyre.
Feyre is desperate for anything and begs Tamlin. This is the first time she really and truly begs Tamlin to let her come with him, even telling him that she'll stay out of their way so that she won't be a burden on them. But Tamlin, in a very on-brand way, denies her and tells her to go for a ride. Dude, it is heartbreaking in this section because as Feyre is saying this, her voice is breaking as she begs him to let her out of the house. This is where her realization, her wake-up call, happens.
The girl who needed to be protected died under the mountain, and there was no one to protect her then. But she still fought on her own. She was her own protector, and she can't let that part of her go. She can't ever not be a fighter, a protector, a doer ever again. And Tamlin can't see her that way because he doesn't want to, because he has a different interpretation on what she needs. But it's not up to him to decide that, and she realizes that fully in this moment. I also love that all book, and even in the last third of ACOTAR, it's been building up to this moment. This breakup feels really natural. It's heartbreaking, yes, but it's so in character, and I marvel at how the pacing and character portrayal is laid out for us. It's one of the ways that make this book so beautiful. We have to be in the dark and walk toward the light together with Feyre.
When I thought I could not hate Tamlin anymore during this section, he says, quote, "Even if I risked it, your untrained abilities render your presence more of a liability than anything. Don't make her feel bad for asking to help."
She's the reason she isn't trained. You fucker. How dare you throw this in her face when she wants to train and be helpful? I can't. Nicole, we got to take this home.
Unsurprisingly, Tamlin's claws punch out during this section. I do wonder, like, does he know that this is the final straw? I have a question. Is he afraid that if he lets her come with them, that she's going to run away? I hope. I hope he's afraid of that.
I'm going to say no, because he's that surprised and crazy when she is, big air quotations, taken.
That's good. That's true.
He's making a rash decision in the heat of the moment, which Lucien will later insist he regrets. And while yes, I do believe him, it's the exact same thing with the study, only this is arguably worse because it's purposeful. It's choosing to do this to Feyre. While the study was an accident, still very bad, don't get me wrong, but the fact that Tamlin makes this decision to lock her up is what shatters whatever scraps were left of their relationship.
Well, here it is. A wall of solid air hits Feyre, and she realizes that she's been locked in the house.
There's nothing she can do about it because she had, quote, let him convince her not to learn any of those things for his sake. There it is again, his sake. This whole scene, it's so heartbreaking for Feyre because she's being treated like she's a victim of her own making, but she's been trying otherwise and she's just getting gaslit into being this victim.
Lucien mentions to Feyre to not even bother to try getting past the barrier. It's said very sadly and very heartbroken for her, saying how others can go in, but Feyre cannot go in or out until Tamlin lifts the shield. He doesn't know a lot about this shield, probably because he's been friends with Tamlin for centuries, but it did cross my mind, maybe this is just because I'm so fuck you Tamlin this section, is he speaking from personal experience?
Like if the shield was protecting the manor at any other time?
Oh, I was thinking Tamlin put the shield around Lucien to like punish him at one point.
I don't think so. I think, I don't think so. This does feel very premeditated, though, on Tamlin's end, where he knew that if Feyre tried to come after them, that this would be his solution. And here you can tell that Lucien doesn't agree with it, but from his perspective, what's he supposed to do? So again, like a part of me thinks that this was an in-the-moment rash decision on Tamlin's part. And at the same time, we're getting little hints that it might have been a little bit more premeditated, where he and Ianthe agreed, hey, if things get bad and she does try to come with us, you know what we have to do. I really don't know that, but
it makes sense.
Either way, yeah.
So we do need to talk about why this is such a pivotal moment for Fae-vorite, just other than the fact that this is a basic human right, Fae-vorite, whatever, being taken away from her, because we cannot overlook that.
Yes. This is the moment where it all comes to a head about how she not only values but needs freedom over safety, which is why when Moore does arrive in a little while and says, "You're free," that word means everything to Farah because it's all she wants. It's all she needs. Not safe or protected, but free.
Quote, "I was trapped inside this house. I might as well have been under the mountain. I might as well have been inside that cell again. This is why this is such a big deal. Tamlin was by no means free under the mountain, but he was not living in a cell. He instead had a room and certain luxuries that Fae-vorite, in a cell, did not have. And he never went or could go to see her. So he does not automatically think how this action will directly trigger her. That's not a fucking excuse, though, because he should have been damn smart enough to think about that this would affect her. And to be honest, that means he has to think about someone other than himself for once. I don't think that even crossed his mind that this would be a final straw for her, and this would be anywhere near as triggering for her as it was.
I agree. We know that he knew it was going to upset her, but as far as he's concerned, they are the happily ever after tale. There is no alternative to him.
Fae-vorite has felt trapped for months, which is why the openness of the Moonstone Palace in the Night Court eases and relaxes her. But this is the moment that the trapping becomes physical, like a physical wall between her and her freedom.
And it understandably turns into a panic attack. The descriptions of it are painfully accurate, and I'll even go so far to say painfully beautiful in their own really raw emotional way. As Farah repeats her reality again and again, she's locked up. He locked her up. She is locked up. He trapped her, and she can't get out. She can't get out. She can't breathe right. There is a roaring in her ears, and there is this crushing blackness in her where she feels like she has become absolutely nothing, and there is no way out of this reality she has found herself in. We frequently talk about how we might not be able to relate to, being in the spring court or being in this fantastical world, but as readers, we can always identify with these characters and the experiences that they're going through. And one of the big reasons that people resonate so much with this scene and really feel for Farah is because they have also experienced panic attacks. They have also felt that feeling of trapped, of not being able to escape their emotions.
Fae-vorite unravels, and in her anger, fear, and sadness, her powers start manifesting. It's so fitting that Rhys's powers, her power of darkness that she gets from Rhys, I should say, is what emerges first. And then she basically becomes like Avatar: The Last Airbender in the final episode. Like fire, ice, wind joining together in the fray until she is literally losing herself in a cocoon and collapses. We will later learn in chapter 54 that when this was all happening, Rhys being a decent dude and someone who could feel his mate in unimaginable pain, admits that he would have killed Tamlin if he had been there. And while we at Fantasy Fangirls do not condone violence, it's fucking fair. But that doesn't happen. Soft hands pick Fae-vorite up. It is so sad that Fae-vorite immediately thinks it's Amarantha, which of course, she was literally just triggered to her time under the mountain. But thank goodness it's more. Speaking of thank goodness for Alice, aka Lisa from marketing. Later in ACOMAF, we will get a small glimpse into this perspective from her on this day. Quote, "I was there that day, I saw the Morgan arrive, saw her reach into that cocoon of power and pick you up like a child. I begged her to take you out. This is why Alice is the GOAT. We will miss you. You win, Lucian." But that's it from the Spring Court.
Not to put a damper on things, because, we're real cheerful right now. But all those sentries who didn't do anything while Farah was breaking down? Moore says here to Alice that the guards will have, quote, "one hell of a headache when they wake up, but they're alive. Be grateful." Not for long, because Tamlin will kill them. We have to remember this.
I totally forgot about that. Oh my God.
I feel like people forget about this. In ACOMAF, Lucian will share what happened in the aftermath of all of this to Farah. Tamlin killed the sentries who had been on guard during this incident after he got the last bit of information from them. Let me restate that. Tamlin will execute them in front of everyone in the manor. But don't worry, Moore. They just have headaches right now.
Moore carries Feyre through another super convenient cave into a neighboring court. Obviously, the two neighboring courts are Autumn and Summer. I think with the descriptions, we can assume it's Summer. But this also is a similar cave to what Lucien and Feyre will use next book to flee. When Rhys takes a hold of Feyre, quote, "A sweeter, softer shade of night caressed me, stroking my nerves, my lungs, until I could at last get air inside." It's so beautiful. She's in her mate's arms. She's finally able to breathe again. Again, back to what you said earlier, she's free. Plus, let us all not forget that the night has always been calming to Feyre, and quote, "A sweeter, softer shade of night caressed me."
Moore confirms she did everything by the book because you see, as another court, you are not allowed to just come into a court and take one of its members, especially the bride of the High Lord. As Rhys will explain in chapter 13, by law and protocol, things would have been very complicated and very messy if Rhys was the one himself to walk into the house and take Feyre. He was able to smash the shield, but Moore had to go in on her own 2 feet and carry Feyre over the border to another court before Rhys could bring her to the Night Court, or else Tamlin would then have free reign to march his forces into Rhys's land and reclaim her. I will say, however, in chapter 54, Rhys will alter this explanation a little by saying he broke some very fundamental rules in taking her away, and Tamlin has license to wage war on Rhys. Amren even said that if Feyre would admit she and Rhys were mates, that would keep trouble from knocking on their door. But Rhys refused to do that because he didn't want to force the bond on Feyre because she had been through so much already.
And with that, Feyre and us have left the Spring Court! We made it!
Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!
I never want to go back to the fucking Spring Court ever again. These were the 2 hardest episodes we've ever done.
But we're not done with this episode yet, friends. While we've already highlighted plenty of foreshadowing moments, let's turn our full attention to the foreshadowing of the rest of this book and beyond in the series. Rhys states Moore is his only surviving family. Yes, because Tamlin's father, and his brothers killed Rhys's mom, sister, and father. Technically, Moore is Rhys's only surviving chosen family, since Moore's family are also Rhys's cousins in the loosest definition, according to him. But this story is all about found family, and so of course they consider each other the only other's family after everything that happened with those in the hewn city.
When Feyre is trying to kick Rhys out of her mind, quote, "A wave of self, of me, to sweep all of him out." Not only will she turn herself into a wave, so to speak, in order to break into Tarquin's mind in the Summer Court, but I love that she describes the wave as her, not Summer Court, probably because she doesn't really know much better right now, but she's still linking this particular power to her own self. Water will be one of her go-to powers, I'll call it, that Feyre taps into in this book. And this is only the surface, get it, of what is coming through. Similarly, Feyre will also ask if she'll ever be able to really and truly keep him out of her mind. And Rhys says, not likely, but who knows? Not only is this the mating bond major hint, wink, wink, hint, hint here, but Feyre will also fully keep him out during the Battle of Valaris when she chooses to go after the Adder and not go back to the townhouse.
Feyre accuses Rhys of not having a very high opinion of Ianthe and, quote, "something cold and predatory crept into his eyes." Yeah, he sure doesn't have a high opinion of her after she tried to throw her naked self at him and didn't like to hear the word no. Boo! We hate you, Ianthe.
In Rhys's office, or tower, war room, whatever it is, there is a circular table with a massive map of the world with flags pinned to it. Could this be for war movements? Absolutely. But this also could be the start of Rhys's searching for other worlds, much like he will be doing in his study in A Court of Silver Flames.
Rhys offers us a small glimpse into his experiences from the previous war. Next book's prologue will be an excerpt from this very time where he is looking for his Illyrian brothers on a bloody battlefield. He never wants that kind of bloodshed again, but unfortunately, we will get a lot of it in the next book.
In Rhys's motivational speech to Feyre, he mentions to her becoming vital. This word choice is very interesting because she does become vital to the Inner Circle, the Night Court, and Rhys, but she will still not view herself as such, particularly at the end of this book. In ACOWAR, Cassian will confront Feyre about his anger with her and what she did in the end of this book, calling out that she does not believe that she's a vital member of this group. Moore mentions that Cassian and Asriel are waiting in the, quote, normal spot, assuming this is the House of Wind because they can't winnow into the townhouse.
We're so close. Next episode, we'll be reunited, my lovely Cassian. Feyre feels that Rhys's hands are cold and sturdy, calloused from weapons she's never seen on him. Hey, Illyrian warrior. He does indeed fight with weapons that callous his hands, and he can hold his own without his power.
The kindness that Feyre shows to the Water Wraiths will indeed be the best kind of karma. The Water Wraiths' sisters will save her and Amren's lives in the Summer Court when everything goes to hell when they try to steal one part of the Book of Breathings.
The debt will be repaid.
Can't wait. When Feyre explains to Tamlin about why she gave the Water Wraith her jewelry, she mentions how he has no idea what it's like to be on the verge of starvation. She will soon be at a dinner with the Inner Circle and think about how Cassian is the first person that she's met in Prythian who has been in her position. I love their friendship.
Last one here. Feyre notes that she has a knack for survival, but it's not the same as trained skill. Soon, Feyre, you will learn how to fight with the best of them, by the best, because yes, you will realize just how different survival skills are from fighting, and you have a lot to learn. But you learn it!
Now it is time to sip some tea with the Suriel. Every episode, Lexi will sip some tea with the Suriel and walk us through a world-building topic to help us better understand this world of Prythian and the people in it.
Today's Suriel Teatime topic has been prominent in part 1 of ACOMAF and will keep popping up in the rest of the series. Unfortunately, it's not super light, so just stick with me here, friends.
It's okay. This episode has been so light, so this is a very different taste.
So, friends, it is time to learn all about the High Priestesses and Priestesses of Prythian. High Priestesses and Priestesses are high fae who serve as the link between fairies and their deities. They lead religious ceremonies and rituals, including mating ceremonies and weddings. They record histories and legends, and they are also advisors to their lords and ladies. There are 12 High Priestesses, and they govern all the priestesses in Prythian. While the High Lords rule Prythian from their thrones, the High Priestesses reign from their altars. Many of these priestesses, specifically the High Priestesses, it's a little bit unclear, reside in the Dawn Court, Day Court, and Winter Court. According to Rhys, High Priestesses have burrowed into these courts and entrenched themselves so thoroughly that their spies are everywhere and their followers are near fanatic with devotion. But when Amarantha began her reign 50 years ago, it is assumed that they escaped and remained hidden, like Ianthe and her family went to fairy territory on the continent. Priestesses are allowed to dally, marry, and bear children, as it would dishonor the Cauldron's gift of fertility to lock up their instincts. They have an inherent female magic in bearing life, and having children among the Fae is, of course, considered a precious gift. High Priestesses have great power in the hierarchy within Prythian and generally seek high-ranked, powerful males. Their children are typically powerful and as well respected as any lord's child. We get from Rhys's perspective that the High Priestesses are quite ambitious and like wolves around a carcass, but we get a very different perspective of priestesses who are more dedicated to their work and they're kind-hearted. Think, of course, of the priestesses in the library that we meet in Silver Flames. So how do High Priestesses get their magic? According to Lucian, the priestesses get their magic from their ceremonies and can be lethal if they choose to be. They also seem to have, I'll call it standard magic like the other High Fae do. Think of how Clotho is able to magically write to communicate. Additionally, 3 temples have been hiding pieces of the Cauldron's feet. I will not laugh at that again. And the foot power, I'm sorry, and the foot power can fuel the priestess's gifts for millennia.
You need a key cursor.
There are temples throughout Prythian, and like I said, some of the High Priestesses live as nobility and advisors in the courts. After the war, pieces of the Cauldron's feet were given to the priestesses to hide in 3 different temples, so the Cauldron could not be used at its full power. Cesare, which we learned from Moore, was attacked. It was a small city in the northeast part of the Night Court territory, and Rhys and its 2 surviving priestesses will discuss rebuilding the temple later on. Sangrava, where Hybern's forces will slaughter and rape the priestesses, leading the few survivors to find safety in the library. And Ithaca. Both Sangrava and Ithaca are located outside of the Night Court, but we don't know where. These temples are being targeted and ransacked because the King of Hybern is activating the Cauldron again, and he wants it at full power and without a wisp missing. Some priestesses live in the library located beneath the House of Wind, including Clotho, who was the first refugee that the Night Court, specifically Moore, took in and gave a safe haven in the library. There are priestesses who live and work in the library, and they get to choose who enters and who doesn't. They all have very traumatic pasts, and the library serves as their space. And then we also know that there are priestesses in the war camps too. The priestesses wear a shining silver circlet set with an oval blue invoking stone. They have billowing, artfully twisted and layered robes that are pale blue in color. At least in Ianthe's case, these robes are far from matrony as they hug the curves of her body. There is also a panel of cloth atop their hood, normally folded under their circlet, that can be pulled over the brow and eyes for when they prayed, beseeched the cauldron, or just need to think. It's typically worn folded back though. They also wear silver bracelets and other silver jewelry. Shouts to you, children of the blessed. A few additional facts about the priestesses. At least in the Spring Court, the High Priestesses themselves grant the sacred hunting rights to the High Lord when members of their court don't pay their due for the tithe. They typically have services at dawn and dusk and on every holy day in which they worship with songs. Let's move on to the High Priestesses that we know of. Of course, we have Ianthe. She is the youngest High Priestess of Prythian for 300 years. She does not have a good relationship with the other High Priestesses. And oh yeah, she's infiltrating the Spring Court and working with Hybern, who has promised her power to rule over Prythian. We also have Clotho. I think she's a High Priestess. I apologize if I get that wrong there. She resides in the library in Valaris and oversees the other priestesses there. The only other High Priestess I've mentioned in the whole series is Olenna, who is from a long time ago. Hey, shouts to Olenna from Game of Thrones there, right? We also, of course, meet lots of priestesses throughout the series, notably Gwyneth and others in the library in Silver Flames.
Awesome. Let us close out the ACOTAR only part of this episode with our favorite moments. Quote, meet the charming and open-minded Feyre. I love that line from Rhys, and what a small, dig at his mate.
Just everything about the first interaction with Moore and how it brings forth a new element to Rhys's character with how she sticks out her tongue at him and he rolls his eyes. It's just so fitting that she's the first one in the inner circle that we meet, and I just love it.
I love the moment where Feyre mentions, I've never seen Rhys irked. It's just further showing us how family is. This is him with his family. And she, meaning Moore, is getting under his skin in only a way that family can. We also get our first filthy gesture, which Rhys tosses at Moore. Shouts to our Friends reference with that one, or the that was only for YouTube. You're welcome.
Right after we meet Moore, Rhys asks Feyre if she ate enough. His concern for her well-being, it's just so heart-wrenching.
This one sentence is perfect. Quote, delicious, he purred. Name a more Fantasy Fangirl sentence, I dare you.
In my annotations, I just wrote, Nicole.
Feyre thinks about a moment where Tamlin crept up on her and she went into such a panic that she literally knocked him on his ass with a punch to the stomach. Quote, the shock on Tam's face, how easy it had been to take him off his feet. I do not love that it's because she was so panicked that this is the situation she was put in, but I do have to say it brings me more joy than it should. That super protective, I don't need anyone to protect my macho ass Tamlin gets easily knocked out by his little doe-eyed fiance. That makes me so happy. Rhys says to Feyre that she's, quote, ... close to Tamlin. He cannot even get himself to say how she's in love with Tamlin. She still is. It's more of idea of Tamlin, especially from last book. But I love that this is just a little hint at his affection for her, and I'm here for jealous Rhys. I cannot wait to get to the summer court. We get another Legally Blonde, it's hard moment, because Rhys says that rumor has it Feyre caught a Suriel, and she says, quote, it wasn't that hard. Rhys is like, bitch, I tried twice.
I will never not be baffled by the fact that Feyre caught a Suriel when not even Rhys can. But I will say this. I wonder if he isn't focusing so much on her hunting ability as he is with his hunch that like calls to like, especially after seeing the power that transmitted to her like a High Lord's. He might just be masking it as emphasis on the fact that she can catch a Suriel when really it's that she can hunt High Lord's things in a way no one else can.
Rhys leaves to go help Cassian and Az with the aftermath of Césaire, and he literally walks off the veranda / the cliff face. First, what a show off. I love that for Rhys. It's amazing.
So Aladdin.
It's
with the magic carpet.
It is very Aladdin. Secondly, though, Feyre's heart stops dead. I do think that mainly that is the human part of her that doesn't automatically think, oh, they have magic / wings yet. But I also love the double meaning for mating bonds when your mate is in danger and you literally have a primal reaction.
I also loved how Feyre noticed when Rhys sprouted wings that even the way he stood changed, like he was steadier and more grounded. He's just such an Illyrian.
He is. One of the lines that Rhys has Feyre copying is, quote, Rhysand is interesting. Not only is this his cocky flirting, which is my favorite, but it's also using that word interesting here, again, calling out how he called her powers interesting as well. It's just another little fun tie-in with these two, and I love it.
The descriptions that separate Rhys and Tamlin are just so poetic. Rhys is always described as graceful, steady, strong, grounded, and then Tamlin literally plops down. Like, need I say more?
During the interrogation from Tamlin and Lucien, Feyre brings up Cassian and Azriel, and both Lucien and Tamlin's faces tighten. I read this as they are intimidated by these Illyrian warriors, which again makes me so happy. After the tide, this might be my favoriteest moment. Alice says in regards to the water wraiths, quote, they're a slippery sort. Alice has got jokes.
When Tamlin begs Rhys to get Feyre out of the bargain, Rhys says, quote, I already have everything I want. Even 1 week a month with his mate, just to stroke her hatred of him while simultaneously building trust with her. That is everything he wants. He just wants Feyre and safety for her well-being, and he is that for her.
I do think he wants a little other stroking, but that's just me.
Yeah. Feyre's blood goes cold and her power physically responds to Ianthe's idea of having an assassin go after Rhys. Once again, it goes to show that Feyre may hate Rhys outwardly, but inwardly she cares and wants to protect him and hates the idea of him being hunted and killed.
Last moment to highlight here, another Tamlin dig. I love that Rhysand shattered Tamlin's shield around Feyre with, quote, half a thought. It's like, oh, that's cute. That impenetrable magic. Hold my beer. I love it. Friends, we are about to begin our Maasverse Madness section because this episode isn't long enough.
If you've only read ACOTAR before you leave, our next episode, we will be covering chapters 13 through 17. And as always, be sure to join the Patreon party if you want more content and more community. Nicole and I, right after this, we're going right into our book club meeting. We're so excited. And if you're not following us on Instagram and TikTok, what are you doing? Give us a follow at Fantasy Fangirls Pod.
Also, do not forget to rate and review the podcast. It's one of the best things that you can do for all the podcasts that you listen to. It is like the best hug. And do not forget to share this with your fellow ACOTAR friends.
We are now going to enter our Maasverse Madness segment of the episode where we call out series crossover references or discuss theories. Today's Maasverse Madness does include spoilers for all of the Maasverse, so if you have not finished the Throne of Glass series and Crescent City, we will see you next week.
We learn how winnowing works in this stretch of chapters, and the description of, quote, 2 different points on a piece of cloth sounds familiar. It's because it should sound familiar. It is almost identical language to CC2 when Cormac is describing how to teleport. Quote, you have to picture where you want to go, then simply allow yourself to take that step as if you were folding 2 points on a piece of paper so that the 2 points can meet. We do know that in the ACOTAR world, it is extremely rare to winnow, and in CC, it's even more so. Bryce can only do it if she's charged up, and I believe she actually only knows 2 other people who can do it. Don't quote me on that number. But in Throne of Glass, Fenris and Connell are the only 2 known characters who have this power. I tried to search for if there was ever a description of their version of this power, and I couldn't find it, so I don't know if it is similar to the CC and the ACOTAR language.
The Tithe Fairies, quote, as the next fairy, a goat-legged fawn bearing what looked to be a basket of mushrooms. Hello, Juniper race of fairy. That's awesome to see her. Not her specifically, but a similar race as her.
So it is important to know that when the Daglin moved to being the Asteri in Midgard, she is the race of fairy that came from the ACOTAR world rather than the Throne of Glass world, we can assume, based on this description. But speaking of the tithe, there is also another tithe. When the Daglin ruled Prithian, Selene mentions how there was a once-a-year tithe, which is offering up the kernels of power as tribute. Obviously, they did not have a drop in the Daglin rule of Prithian, so this was their version of the drop in order to feed the Asteri. All right, friends, that was a short and sweet Maasverse Madness, but that is it. We are out of the Spring Court. We're going to Valaris next episode.
Yeah, we are. We're meeting the Inner Circle. We're so excited to jump into chapters 13 through 17.
Thank you, as always, to our executive producer, Hayden, a.k.a. our sanity manager. We love you.
Be sure to sign up for our monthly newsletter. The link is in the show notes if you want even more Fantasy Fangirls content delivered straight to your inbox.
And if you have not already, please take a moment. It literally takes just a moment to rate and review the show. It is one of the best things that you can do to help us and help any podcast that you listen to. But most importantly, as always, share this with your fellow ACOTAR friends. If you were also like mother effing F-U Tamlin, middle fingers in the air, burning at Viking funeral, I'm talking about throwing Illyrian daggers at the wedding dress, you want to throw them at Tamlin, share this episode with them, because then we can all bask in our anger together.
We will see you next week in Valaris.
Bye. Whoa, keep it in there. Okay. What am I saying? Read. I'm sorry. I spilled all over myself.
I'm sorry, wrong moment. Bad moment for that to happen.
It got in your hair. Oh my God.
It's all in my hair. Yeah. Okay. Continue on with this very serious moment.